Welcome to Tampa Bay's #1 rated talk show, The Bob Lassiter Show.
7 minutes after the hour of 7 o'clock, a very good Wednesday evening to you, March the 4th, 1987. Lassiter with you until 11, as I am every Monday through Thursday, 9 o'clock on Fridays, and then, of course, every 4th or 5th Saturday, but you know all about that. Joining me live in studio tonight, an old friend who has been with me perhaps a half a dozen times now. I'm not really sure. I guess I've lost track, although we go through this every time you're here. Colonel Jack Burke, retired military, retired U.S. Army. Infantry, if I'm not mistaken?
No, I was a tanker, Bob.
Mistaken. Tanker.
One of the hatch cover types.
Okay. Jack, welcome back. Always a delight to have you here in the studio. 3 areas primarily that I want to touch upon tonight, although when you and I get at it, we never know where we're going to end up. The last time you were in here, which was, I believe, if memory serves me, the last afternoon show I did, so that would have been September the 30th.
I think that's right, yeah.
I mentioned to you that afternoon a little blurb that I had seen in the Wall Street Journal that week about the administration being ready to propose to the Soviets the elimination of nuclear forces in Europe. And I vividly remember the expression on your face. You virtually turned white. You had not heard of any such animal. Virtually no one had heard of any such animal. And lo and behold, a few weeks later, in Reykjavik, turned out to be true. Or at least basically true. It is my understanding, and I can't remember his name, but one of the advisors, military advisors to the president, one of the right-wingers, had suggested this, thinking that the Soviets would find it so appalling they would go running in the other direction. And, of course, Gorbachev sat there at the table and in essence said, okay, which sent the Reagan forces into a tailspin. This past weekend, Gorbachev came back and offered, in essence, pretty much the same deal, now putting the ball in the administration's court. From a military point of view, on September the 30th, when last we talked, you were appalled at any such suggestion because, as virtually anyone with much of a military background or no military background at all should easily be able to see, is that the Soviets have vastly superior conventional forces available to them in Europe, and NATO and the U.S. forces are just simply overwhelmed. Any additional thoughts on it?
The statement you just made, I believe, is entirely correct, Bob. That, or at least your statement of someone's opinion that the Soviet forces, indeed, in Europe are poised and in quantity and so forth, have an enormous advantage. There's some disagreement over that. There are variations of it. There are those who say, well, it isn't as great as we make it to be, and there are others who say that it actually is literally overwhelming. But the conventional power the Soviets have in Europe, in my opinion, and I am expressing the opinion of a good number of military people, including, I'm quite sure, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is that we meaning we, NATO, and so forth, do not have the capability to handle Soviet forces. And what is interesting about this is the fact that going back over many years, going back 25 years or so, it has always been NATO policy, always, that we would, if necessary, engage in a first strike retaliation under critical conditions. In other words, the Soviet launch a major attack into Western Europe, and if we're not able to contain it, and the thing is going to get out of hand, that we'd really have no choice, regardless of the dangers, we'd have no choice but to retaliate. Well,
we could still pretty much do that very same thing from submarines sitting in the Mediterranean.
Not really.
We could not?
No.
Why not?
The submarine forces and the submarine nuclear attack capability does not have that kind of control. It doesn't have that kind of communications. It doesn't have that kind of accuracy to be able to strike tactically against Soviet forces in Europe. For instance, to deliver a sub-kiloton nuclear strike, perhaps by thousands of weapons, which in fact we have. I think we have something like, the unclassified estimate is around over 7,000 nuclear warheads This is apart from intermediate nuclear range or
So
longer range
we're
missiles.
talking about
cannon artillery,
shoulder fired,
sure,
et cetera, et cetera.
Even that's right. In others, right down to a lower level. Well, how would a submarine respond to command and control? First of all, nuclear weapons cannot be released at all under our law, except by the president, to begin with. It is almost impossible to have a prearranged trigger point in which all the submarines are lined up. They know from satellite communication as well as their own internal positioning capability where they are and where to strike. And they're not designed for counterattack against tactical forces, Bob. They're designed for a longer, intermediate, and longer range attack against greater targets.
Okay, well, actually, you're introducing a third element here, because I was also about to ask you the difference between ballistic and strategic weapons. You're now talking about tactical weapons, and unless I've just been remiss, this has gone completely over my head. I don't remember hearing any talk, really, on a serious level about the tactical weapons. They're talking about the missiles, I thought, the intermediate range missiles.
Yeah.
And again, referring back to September the 30th, I was not clear at that time whether the article had said strategic or ballistic. What is the difference on those two?
Well, those two terms are a little bit apples and oranges. In other words, strategic has to do with the longer range major targeting capability of a missile system.
Mm-hmm.
It does not have to do with, in other words, as different from tactical.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your question is, what is the difference between strategic and what?
Ballistic.
And ballistic is a technical term that simply has to do with the trajectory and nature of the weapon.
Okay, the ballistics are primarily the large
not necessarily
killer missiles. No.
Well, it happens that they are. In other words, it happens that those are the major type. You could have cannon-fired artillery, which are not what we call a ballistic missile.
Mm-hmm.
They are, in fact, they're an artillery shell.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in fact, no different than that of a conventional artillery shell, except that they have a nuclear warhead, and the means of control and delivery and targeting and everything is entirely different. But ballistic is a technical term, which means, in effect, is it a missile to begin with that is moving in the atmosphere, or is moving, in other words, on a given trajectory, having been projected on that trajectory at the outset, either by the missile launcher system or by a gun or whatever it happens to be. So the targeting. For instance, a 155 millimeter howitzer, which happens at the end of the gun. In other words, the gun itself tells the round where it's going to go, is quite different than that of a ballistic missile. But ballistic, in other words, the difference here is not between strategic and tactical, ballistic and non-ballistic.
Okay, let me come back again to the proposal at Reykjavik and the proposal last weekend by Gorbachev. It was my understanding that they were talking primarily about the missiles, the Pershings, the cruises, whatever.
That's right. In other words, intermediate range to long range missiles.
Would I be incorrect in saying even if we were to remove all of those, it may not be quite as advantageous, but nonetheless we would still have the same capabilities of what those missiles are targeted for by the submarines in the Mediterranean?
No, we wouldn't have the range capability. In other words, if an agreement were reached to eliminate what you would call ballistic missiles, then in effect we have left tactical missiles fired from the point of a gun, in effect, or relatively small launchers of one kind or another, air-breathing missiles or whatever, that simply do not have the power or the range, the throw weight and so forth of the bigger ballistic missiles, either intermediate range or strategic.
Okay, again, maybe I'm not making myself clear, but if we were to remove the Pershings from Europe, it is my understanding, and if I'm not being clear on this, or if I'm just way out in left field, let me know, but it's my understanding that if we were to remove those Pershings, they're the ones that are targeted, I think, at Kiev and at Odessa and at Moscow and at Leningrad. These are not tactical weapons. These are weapons of mass destruction. They're sitting in Europe because they can get to these places a hell of a lot faster than one fired from Wyoming. And they're much more difficult to defend against because they don't go as high into the atmosphere and come down. They're quasi-tactical. In other words, they don't have the long range. But they're designed to take out cities instead of a column of tanks. Are they
not? Well, they would not be used for efficiency reasons. It would hardly make sense to launch a Pershing II missile at long range against a column of tanks.
Mm-hmm.
You need a bigger target than that to make it cost effectiveness worthwhile. In other words, from the viewpoint of just sheer logistics of it. It would be extremely effective. First of all, you're partially correct. In other words, a Pershing can deliver a warhead which has a major target impact on a city or a small city or an entire array of troops, in a given area and this kind of thing, against communication means, against bridges and so forth. But I would say that I think that in principle you're correct. In other words, in fact, so much so that the Soviets look on a Pershing II as being strategic, while we do not. That happens to be part of the argument. The reason being this Pershing II is situated for launching in Western Europe.
Well, I'm sure, for example, that it's much more cost-effective to fire that Pershing II, delivering its single warhead, than to fire what are they, Poseidons now?
From a submarine.
From a submarine, with up to 10 warheads. I'm sure from a cost-effective basis, it's much cheaper to fire off the Pershing II, although when it gets down to the point of firing nuclear missiles at each other, be damned with the cost. That's the least of our problems.
No, then availability, of course, is the problem, and you can only have so many of a given type of weapon. But you're right. The statement you just made is essentially correct.
Okay, we also have another problem, and that is that our allies in Europe, from a domestic point of view, this is my understanding of the situation. This is primarily what their populations would like to see. Get those damn missiles the hell out of our backyards. Get us off the target list for the Soviets. And yet, from a realistic military point of view, our European allies appreciate the fact that we're saving them a hell of a lot of money by keeping our hardware over there and not forcing them to spend so much of their gross national product on defense.
Yeah, the Europeans, Bob, are speaking in a way with forked tongue. In other words, there's always two elements. There's what is being said by the populace at large, meaning we would like to be, if anything, if we could possibly do it, we'd like to be a nuclear-free zone in which people aren't going to go throwing nukes at Western Europe. When you consider the thing, why would they want nukes thrown at Western Europe? On the other hand, their leaders, and this, by the way, includes the middle road and some on the left, not just the extreme right wing, know very well that NATO's defenses are based upon the proposition that under given circumstances there will be a nuclear response. And they know that. In fact, the Europeans, after all, as a result of the Reykjavik propositions and discussions, many of them are extremely upset because without consultation, as they put it, now, of course, I don't know whether there was any consultation, but I doubt it, suddenly they find the plug pulled on them. They have agreed as a people, all right, and as a matter of fact, the Christian Democrats and the Chancellor of Germany did get generally a public acceptance of the fact that Pershing II and cruise missiles deployed by the United States will be in Germany, and this is only a couple of years ago. And having gone through several years of agonizing political decision to get that decision, and now that we are deploying them in Europe, we suddenly find there's going to be a discussion about pulling them out of Europe based upon some proposition made by the Soviet Union.
Well, I think there's another very legitimate fear in the hearts of the Europeans, and without asking you to tell any tales out of school, if I can phrase this question properly, or maybe you don't even have any direct knowledge, but if I can phrase this question properly so that you don't have to tell tales out of school if you do have such knowledge, is it not reasonable for me, a mere mortal, to assume that somewhere in a file cabinet in the Pentagon is a scenario, and that somewhere in the file cabinet at the Kremlin is another scenario, and those scenarios might read something to the effect of, if we and the Soviets have a severe enough disagreement that rather than go for all-out nuclear war, to show them that we're really serious and we're really not going to take any more of this, we'll take out Budapest. And is it not reasonable to assume that they have a similar scenario that says to show the Americans that we're really serious about this and we're not going to take any more of this crap, we're going to take out Frankfurt, as opposed to firing missiles at New York or Moscow in the early stages of a confrontation? Is that not a reasonable thing for me to assume?
I think it's reasonable to assume from a planning point of view.
And this, of course,
because military, exactly, and because military planners naturally develop plans which, no matter how politically feasible or realistic they may be, nevertheless are on paper in the event of contingency. or as a threat.
Well, from the point of view of an American or from the point of view of a Soviet, I certainly hope we have such a plan, and that's the way we would go about it, to keep those missiles from flying at New York and at Moscow.
Well, to me, one of the very important points about this thing is what we might call the American ethos. In other words, regardless of what is in military plans, plans meaning one of those things that you could implement if you had to or if you could, what would a president of the United States really do in the event of that circumstance? In other words, would he really pull the trigger, so to speak, on Budapest? Would he, and would he do so without the agreement of the European leaders and without the agreement of the NATO countries?
Might he not pull that trigger on Budapest if he had reason to suspect that if he didn't do that today, the Soviets might pull the trigger on Kansas City tomorrow to show how serious they were?
Well, but here's the thing: if the Soviets are serious, and in fact they do have the capability to pull the trigger on Kansas City, and they have the capability of doing that without us having an adequate response, as a matter of fact, then you see this, in my view, the concept of nuclear warfare in Europe, at first use, so to speak, in other words, we strike back first, whether it be against the tactical units or whether it be against a city, is becoming more and more and more incredible. That is, its credibility is gradually fading. The reason being that what counts, Bob, is the second stage. In other words, having done this, then what happens? Well, we simply don't have the kind of nuclear capability to keep this up at each level of escalation. In other words, from the tactical level to the semi-tactical level to the strategic level. If you see what I'm getting at, in other words, it's step one, then it's step two, then it's step three. Yeah, and we don't have the capability of doing that.
I can see a scenario where we might be forced into that. Let us assume that we woke up tomorrow morning to find 650,000 Soviet troops poised on the east-west German border. Mm-hmm. And the President of the United States has primarily two options available to him. He can make a great speech talking about, moving mountains and fording rivers until the jackals are driven back, and cross his fingers and hope that will do it. Yeah. Or his other option might be to take out Budapest, just to show him just how damn serious we might think this would be. And I would think that was the option that he would go with. Actually, I hope it's the option he would go with.
I don't think so. That first of all, what would indeed be world and public reaction if, as a first nuclear effort, in other words, not something that you did in retaliation, not something you did because they took out London or they took out Frankfurt or they took out, but rather which you did, you attacked Budapest rather than to simply attack the troops that are attacking. Why not use your tactical nuclear weapons first to destroy Soviet tank columns? Why would there be an attack on the city? What would that prove in a way, considering
it wouldn't be a direct attack on the Soviets?
But they have a capability of counterattack that is greater, much greater.
But again, it wouldn't be a direct attack on the Soviets. It would be an attack on a Soviet interest, just as an attack on Frankfurt wouldn't be a direct attack on America, just on American interests.
But how would American interests be served by eliminating the city of Budapest?
To show them we were serious.
We can show them the serious by eliminating the city of Moscow.
Yes, but that would guarantee a retaliatory attack. They'd have no choice.
You're going to guarantee a retaliatory attack if you drop a megaton weapon on the city of Budapest, aren't
you? Yes, but we're ensuring it on Frankfurt or Birmingham, England, or something like that. We're not risking New York City or Washington D.C. or Lord forbid Tampa Bay, Florida.
Well, yes, we are, but step by step. It's the old story of, the bully on the block. You step over the line and see what happens type of thing. I mean, it's a question of who blinks first. We attack Budapest. They respond by dropping one on Frankfurt. We respond by dropping one in, Romania somewhere. They respond by dropping one on Cologne. We respond, and next thing you know, then what? Eventually, isn't this going to become an strategic exchange?
In all likelihood, yeah.
Yeah.
26 minutes after the hour of 7 o'clock, my guest is Colonel Jack Burke. We'll continue the conversation. In fact, we've been sitting here talking theory. Let's take it a step further. Your best guess, an educated guess it is, too. On a scale of 1 to 100, 1 being the least likely, 100 the most likely, what are the odds of the Soviets mounting that 650,000-man force and marching through Europe anytime within, let's say, the next 3 to 5 years? Where would you put it on a scale of 1 to 100?
I'd put...
Without provocation.
Now, 100 is the greatest likelihood, and 1 is the minimum
least
likelihood. Oh, I'd put it on a scale of 10, maybe. Or less.
Very, very unlikely.
Or less. Very, very unlikely, yes.
But what are we so upset about? Why do we beat our breasts so much? Are they not marching because we have those tactical weapons there, or are they not marching because they know it's the beginning of World War III, with or without those tactical and strategic weapons?
Well, both of the above in a way. They again, all of this is coming off my head, but that's all right. You know, it's based on some outside advice, let's say. It is very unlikely, I believe, that the Soviets have in mind a major confrontation. Not confrontation. We have a major confrontation. They do not have in mind a direct physical military confrontation with the United States or with Western Europe, offensive of that kind, Bob. And well, they certainly don't as a matter of general objective. Why should they? If there's anything that they are is pretty good chess players and excellent strategists. And if there's anything that they know is the oldest strategic philosophy that's ever come down to us from old Sun Tzu and all these characters back in the year 2000 BC and 1000 BC, whatever. And that is that the best way to, in other words, if the smartest thing to do is to never, never engage if you can avoid engagement and still get your way. If you can achieve your strategic objectives without fighting, that is best of all. If you can achieve it through surrogates of forces of some sort, in other words, you achieve it by blackmail, you achieve it by surrounding the enemy and then saying you might as well give up because look what's going to happen, that's the second best. The worst of all is to engage, and I don't think the Soviets really want to engage. In fact, there's every evidence that their real strategic goal is to build a military capability where the rest of the world is simply not going to confront them.
Are you very impressed with Gorbachev's domestic moves? Reforms?
Yes. Yes, in several ways. One of them is that it does not seem that his efforts and his philosophy, the approach that he's taken is to me, and to many for that matter, is not purely propaganda. And I don't think that, in other words, it's the type of thing that was delivered before the equivalent of the Soviet Congress in the open, in which there's good evidence that he's going to get a great deal of opposition. And secondly, it makes common sense. It makes a great deal of sense for some intelligent, modern leader of the Soviet Union to attempt to break out of those constraints and those methods and whatever, and structure that they have had, which they know are self-defeating, especially economically.
Has Ronald Reagan outflanked himself with his devil-may-care proposal at Reykjavik and then again the follow-up from Gorbachev this weekend? Are we over a barrel on this one?
I think that, for instance, let's address the latest proposition from Gorbachev, which has to do with the intermediate-range nuclear, so-called IN nuclear weapons in Europe. It puts the West and it puts NATO in a very difficult position. If we go back before we deployed the Pershing missiles and the cruise missiles in Europe, and we had only tactical nuclear weapons, the type that are at the artillery level and so forth, basically, we at the time were saying, look, if you don't withdraw your SS-20 and that type of missile from Europe, then we are going to deploy the Pershing II and the cruise missiles and so forth. Whatever the number is, 500 and something of them and so forth. So the Soviets didn't, and we did. And indeed, it was a considerable political victory to get the Europeans, all of them but Holland, and Holland is a little bit on the border, as you know. I think they generally approve, but hope it doesn't happen. The Netherlands, to permit the deployment of those weapons. Now we're in the position of the Soviets reversing the situation, say, oh, very well. You know, you talked about this zero option thing. In other words, we'll withdraw ours, you withdraw yours, and now we're prepared to talk about that and talk about it without even linking it to the strategic weapons, intercontinental ballistic ICBMs, not even linking it to SDI, the Star Wars so-called effort, which is a complete reversal of what, in fact, they said at Reykjavik. Well, so does that make things difficult? It can, and one of the reasons is that the Soviets have an awful lot of missile systems in Europe that have nothing to do with these intermediate range. The intermediate range missiles are the SS-20, basically. And the SS-20 has 3 warheads. In other words, it has, for each of them, it's 3 times whatever number of those they've got. Some 441 is the latest count.
Mm-hmm.
This is apart from the SS-21 and 22s, however. In other words, and 23s. We're talking about shorter range weapons, which they still have on the ground, and which they haven't mentioned at all as a trade-off in this thing. In addition to their capability to withdraw the SS-20s, which I understand are liftable by heavy helicopter. In other words, you're not talking about weapons that have to be road-driven all the way from behind the Urals back into Europe. You're talking about something that within a period of overnight or the next day or two could be suddenly put back into Western Europe, yet we, after a major political effort, are only now deploying the Pershings and the cruise missiles. So I think it's a very shrewd ploy on the part of the Soviets, and the timing is interesting. At the very time that President Reagan is in deep trouble because of the Iran affair and so forth, doggone if they don't come out forth with the proposition of this kind, which the Europeans themselves. Now, I'm not talking about the pacifist group in Europe or the Greens or whatever, but the European people as a whole are very concerned about. And what they're concerned about is what kind of agreement would we make with the Soviets on that? Just recently, as you know, General Bernard Rogers was, to put it politely, he resigned from his post as Commander-in-Chief in NATO. In reality, of course, he was relieved from his post in Commander-in-Chief in NATO, who took great exception to a discussion of that sort, saying that it would simply open the door to an impossible situation. So it'll be interesting to see how do these negotiate, what verification process can you have for things that are as small and as mobile as an SS-20, 21, 22, and 23 missiles? I think it's a very clever ploy on their part. I think it could lead to something. I'm not saying it's entirely hopeless.
7:36 the time. Jack, when we come back, let's head a little bit southeast and go down to Iran. You just mentioned the Iranian problem that the president has. Let's talk a little bit about that when we come back.
Now fighting category is a hard one.
.40 the time. My guest, Colonel Jack Burke, retired U.S. Army. There was a policy initiated in the White House. It's not really even clear how long ago, a year and a half, 2 years ago, I suppose, that they're now referring to as the Iranian Initiative. Everybody in the whole wide world, with the possible exception of 3 or 4 guys in Washington, seemed to understand what it was all about, the trading of weapons for hostages, or at least favors. The White House still insists that it was nothing of that kind. It was a gesture towards so-called moderates in Iran, who may or may not exist. And even if they do, it seems kind of foolish to me anyway, but that's neither here nor there. First of all, let us assume, for the sake of this conversation, that it wasn't a swap of weapons for hostages. What kind of sense does an Iranian initiative make to you, and why? Or why not, as the case may be?
We have everything to gain, it seems to me, by taking, and I'm going to qualify this, a reasonable risk, whatever that is, and there's always a risk, in trying to gain some sort of foothold, so to speak, in Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Iran is strategically critical. There's no question about this. No question about it whatsoever. In terms of geographical location, in terms of the fundamentalist Muslim movement, which could very well be, a really heavy business in the Middle East. We have everything to gain by trying to have some sort of a foot in the door, so to speak.
What do you think the odds are of having a foot in the door in Iran?
I don't think they're very good, Bob. That's a personal opinion. I don't pretend to be a foreign policy or State Department expert. My thing is more on the military, strategic, and tactical side and so forth. But nevertheless, be that as it may, those things are connected. And I don't think that I just don't see how there's a great opportunity there, except piece by piece and little by little. In other words, you might get a foothold with some connection with somebody in Iran, leader of an underground party or whatever, okay, who eventually, when Khomeini is gone, do come into power or do have some influence, and then you're able to talk to them. But it seems to me that that's an awfully subtle, abstract type of thing when you consider the nature of Iranian society these days.
Iran and the Soviet Union share a common border, correct?
Yes.
Do you have any idea off the top of your head how long that border might be?
No, I don't.
Several hundred miles, though, isn't it?
Mm.
Does that sound reasonable to you, several hundred miles?
Yep.
And then, of course, if I have my geography here correct, Iran and Afghanistan also share a common border of perhaps, again, several hundred miles.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union, i.e., put it another way, is right next door. No strain or pain. They're literally right next door.
They're right next door. They have, from a military point of view, they have a really significant problem as far as entry into Iran, primarily because of terrain.
How long do you think it might take them from a military point of view if they really put their hearts and minds into it to have troops in Tehran? How many days or weeks?
Probably a very short time unless we intervened immediately.
Would you care to guesstimate how many days? A week? 2 weeks?
Yeah. Let's say a week, just off the top of my head. Or even less.
Before the old hammer and sickle is flying in Iran. In Tehran.
In Tehran.
Okay.
Again, assuming now that we do not take some sort of direct military action. Which attack them while they're in the mountain passes, for instance, and, things get different then.
How many days or weeks, as the case may be, or months, as the case may be, would it take us to mount a credible counter-force on the soil in Iran?
We can put what amounts to really fairly minimum forces. Not so much
credible
land forces
to fight with the Soviets might put in there.
Unless we're prepared to use nuclear weapons and to strike immediately with strike aircraft, as different from deployable forces, the people that we put in planes or put in ships and move over there, and we really don't have a base over there. I would think it'd be extremely difficult.
Might it take as much as 1, 2, or 3 months before we had credible ground forces?
It certainly would take several weeks.
And insofar as striking them in the passes, that's quite a few hundred miles inland. It would seem to me that any planes, which would probably come off of aircraft carriers in the either the Mediterranean or the Persian Gulf, would probably be flying ducks, known that they were coming for at least an hour. Headed in that direction. Is that
unless
correct
unless our electronic, counter-electronic, in other words, our electronic warfare, air battle is now in particular getting more and more and more to where it's a matter of electronic measures and countermeasures.
Well, we're not talking about Muammar
unless you were able to, through electronic countermeasures and everything, to somehow or another come in with a surprise strike type of thing. The Soviets have a very formidable air defense capability, a mobile one that moves with their troops, as a matter of fact, far more so than our forces do, by the way.
Or put it another way, which I think you've already said, correct me if I'm wrong, that unless we were willing to use nuclear weapons, there's damn near nothing we could do about it.
I just don't see how what we call a rapid deployment force. We don't have the airlift, Bob. We don't have the airlift to get them there in a hurry. You not only have to have the airlift, but you have to have the means of protecting the airlift. You can't count totally upon tactical aircraft or light bombers or whatever moving off of aircraft carriers in the Indian Ocean, and so or coming from the Mediterranean, as the case may be. I think it'd be a terribly difficult proposition if the Soviets made a really major concentrated move, and by the way, they aren't going to start it unless they do. They're not even going to begin it unless they figure they have the force and the backup force and the aircraft and the counter-air,
which of course they have.
This, which they do. In addition to which, and this is another thing, they have, and I believe I've got the figure correct, at least 7 first-class airborne divisions.
Would it be a fair analogy, and I know this isn't really terribly good, but would it be a fair analogy that they would have about as much chance of stopping our invading Mexico as we would have of stopping their invasion in Iran? Would that be a fair, for the purposes of this conversation, analogy?
I don't really think I don't think that there's that comparison. The Soviet, they after all, what capability at all would they have or do they have to stop an invasion?
Theoretically,
on this continent.
Theoretically, bases in Cuba and bases in Nicaragua.
But there's not enough power there.
Okay, so you don't like that
there's just not. Well, it would. I really don't think that the Soviets would try in this century or at this time to make any kind of really major military move in the Western Hemisphere. It's logistically, it's just logistically too difficult. And even if they had bases in Nicaragua, and they have bases in Cuba, which they do, as a matter of fact, and they may have, and it looks as if they will in Nicaragua. Is that enough to? We don't have. I mean, we're talking here about a situation in the Persian Gulf area, and specifically vis-a-vis Iran, in which if they gear their stuff up, they have an enormous amount of force that could move across the border and move into Iran. They can support it from air. By being in Afghanistan, if you look at it geographically, that puts them within tactical air distance of a strike in not only in Iran but in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, well, I'll stop trying to be cute here and get right down to the meat of where I'm really headed. My point is, we have virtually no capability of stopping their invading Iran at this point in the game, or at any time in the foreseeable future. The Iranians can't really stop them. So it is not our presence in the Middle East. It is not the threat of our retaliation in Iran, if they should choose to go in. It is certainly not the Iranian forces keeping them out. They're staying out of Iran from purely self-discipline, from a self-discipline point of view. They're perfectly capable of going in any time their little hearts desire. The thing that keeps them out of Iran is it's the beginning of World War III. Whether we have an aircraft carrier sitting in the Persian Gulf or not, it's the beginning of World War III if they were to go into that nation, try to cut off the Western world supply of oil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It would frankly be a very foolish, stupid thing for them to do if they want to start World War III. There's no sense in tying their forces up in the mountains of Iran. They can start
and there's no object in them getting themselves overextended to that degree with what amounts to a major military effort on their part, even though I personally am not sanguine about being able to stop them. But that is a major undertaking in which they can then be confronted with forces, with for that matter, the Arabs and the Arabian countries, including the moderates, are not totally helpless. I mean, they don't have any major strike force capable, but they're not entirely helpless. But the Soviets have undertaken a major military move. But your key point, I think your point is the best one. I agree with it. If the Soviets make a move into Iran, what in effect have they told Europe?
It's World War III.
NATO says, wait a minute, our alliance has to do with the defense of Europe. It doesn't have anything to do with the defense of the Persian Gulf. Sure, theoretically. But if the Soviets move into the Persian Gulf area, what does that mean to Europe? Could the Europeans conceivably ignore the fact that the Soviets have moved into the Gulf and start arguing as to whether or not NATO troops, including, by the way, Turkish troops and Turkish forces, would or would not then have to, of necessity, would have to counterattack? But they'd have no choice, really.
But again, are the NATO forces set up to, all pile into a boat, go 1,000 miles across the Mediterranean Sea, and then 900 miles inland into Tehran?
Not really.
Do they have that capability?
Not really.
So they'd be useless.
No, they wouldn't be useless, but not as a quick reaction force.
And about the best thing the NATO forces might be able to do is to open up another front and literally attack the Soviet mainland.
The NATO would have to take some sort of counterstrike action, and wouldn't have any choice whatsoever.
My point being that it is extremely unlikely that the Soviets would go into Iran. Correct? Unless they wanted to start World War III.
I think it's unlikely. It's unlikely, but that doesn't. The very fact that they have the military capability to do that, of itself, has an enormous political influence in the Middle East. And they're building a greater and greater capability through their surrogates, in this case especially Syria.
Well, again, I guess the real point I'm trying to get to, the entire concept of an Iranian initiative, the bending over backwards, the risks that were taken, the embarrassment that was risked and is now being lived through, would seem to me, under the guise of trying to keep the Soviets in place in that part of the world, was a pretty foolish risk. It was a pretty damn stupid thing to do.
I would agree. And I would agree basically not because there was an initiative to try to to get a foothold. I mean, why not? If you can do so with some sensible political means, even at some risk, so to speak, to put your foot in the door with some sort of, quote, moderate elements in Iran, I think that effort has to go forward, diplomatically and otherwise, or even covertly. But the point being that the trading of weapons for this purpose, when, in fact, Iran and Iraq are locked in mortal conflict.
What's a tow missile?
You know.
What can it be used for? I know it's an anti-tank missile, but can it be used for other purposes?
It can be used. It can be used within its, within its range. It's a very effective strike weapon against anything.
What's its range, roughly? For example, could they be using tow missiles to be firing into downtown? Grief! I can't think of the name of the capital of Iraq.
No, because it's essentially.
Thank you, Michael.
No, it's essentially a tactical.
Okay, they're not tow missiles.
It's intended as a tactical missile.
Yeah. But it could be used, for example, to fire into a column of troops. Yes? No? Would that be practical?
Well, certainly. Oh, sure. It's a tactical weapon. It is not a nuclear weapon. It's a tactical strike weapon that's intended basically to defeat hard targets.
Michael, can I skip the 750 break, or do you need it? Okay, we'll just keep right on going. Iran and Iraq, locked in a war now going into 7 or 8 years. Iran having major difficulty resupplying. Of course, many of their weapons were American-made. It's my understanding that their helicopter fleet was, for all practical purposes, grounded prior to getting the replacement parts. Iraq is no friend of ours. Iran is no friend of ours. Neither country is likely to be a friend of ours in the foreseeable future. But Iraq is a buffer between Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. As the case may be. It is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong if you have information contrary to this, that we have defense pacts with both Kuwait and Saudi Arabia.
We do.
That, in theory, if Iraq were to fall to the Ayatollah Khomeini, who seems to be hell-bent on spreading his fundamentalist Islamic revolution, especially into places like Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, which would be the easiest targets on his list, it is quite conceivable that within 12 months or less, we could be called upon to send U.S. boys to defend those two nations against the Ayatollah Khomeini using American-made weapons that were sent by the Reagan administration. Is that plausible or likely?
I don't know within what time period, but there is the greatest danger would be that if Assad were to fall, for instance, the present government in Iraq, which the Iranians at least ostensibly is their objective, and if indeed thereupon Muslim fundamentalism sweeps through that area, and they then proceed to consolidate, and they then proceed, having consolidated militarily, to attack into the Persian Gulf area, we, meaning we and our allies, as best we could rally our allies, would really have no choice but to defend. Whether this would be against America, I doubt if the numbers of weapons that were traded to them, make that much difference. Sure, one of them would show up on the battlefield as an anti-air weapon.
Well, again, going back to 5th grade geography, and Sister Elizabeth, bless her little heart, if memory serves me, as I'm sitting here visualizing a map, there's just a very, very small, thin strip of land separating Iran from Kuwait, and that very small strip of land is the southern portion of Iraq. So if indeed Iraq should fall, or at least the southern half of Iraq should fall, it's a relative short jump to spread that war into another front, into another nation, is it not? Yeah, it's got to be a stupid thing that we did.
To provide them with the weaponry?
Well, not just
first of all, I think
politically missiles. It's the replacement parts for those helicopters and jet fighters that were sitting on the ground rusting away, apparently. Useless.
I don't know how much. I really don't know what the volume and quantity and volume, was of the material that was in this deal, Bob. To be candid about it.
Apparently, it must have been significant.
That's what I just don't know.
Because Iran was making no headway in that war. They were absolutely stymied and stalemated up until about 6 months ago, and all of a sudden they start making advances again that coincide with the purported weapon shipments.
Wasn't the primary? I'm trying to remember. I just don't have the note in front of me. Technically, the weaponry that we supplied, not parts now, not airplane parts, but the weaponry we supplied. Was the American air defense weapon, wasn't it, as different from a tow? A tow is not an air defense weapon.
I don't know.
No.
Really,
I don't know.
I have heard 2,000 tows.
tow
missiles.
Tow missiles.
Beyond that, I don't know.
No, I don't either. But I think that some air defense type weapons were involved also.
I mean, the rumors are that we're talking about boatloads, numerous boatloads of weapons over a long period of time.
This is, I really don't know.
Where, of course, we were initially told a handful of
we were told that
planes.
it's just some other. I really don't know, Bob, and I haven't seen a figure that it may be that's never really been put together. I don't know what the total of that weaponry was. But if you're saying that we could very well run into a military situation in which we're running some of our own weaponry, that's certainly possible.
Coming up on 7:59. Colonel Burke will stay with me in the second hour. By the way, don't forget President Reagan's speech at 9 o'clock where he answers the charges in the Tower Commission, at least supposedly. We'll go into the conversation in the 8 o'clock hour. We'll also open up the phones at that time. We'll expand it a little bit, getting involved in the Strategic Defense Initiative. So if you would like to join in, let me give you the telephone numbers in Hillsborough. It's 224-0057, 224-0057.
Of the day and to hear the people behind the headlines. WPLP, it's something special. Something worth telling a friend about. Do that. The more opinions we all hear, the better off we are.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tampa Bay's top-rated talk show, The Bob Lassiter Show.
After the hour of 8 o'clock. Welcome back. Hour number 2 on this Wednesday, March the 4th, 1987. My guest in studio, Colonel Jack Burke, retired U.S. Army. Colonel, I don't want to get totally bogged down in the Iranian situation and the Contra gate, whatever it may end up being called. The President will be speaking in less than an hour now on that very subject. But there's something that keeps going round and round and round and round. A lot of people are asking the question, and I'm not really sure that I've heard a very definitive answer on it. And maybe you're not even the man to ask, but I assume that at some point during your career you read the little manual that they gave you in the Army. A lot of Americans want to know if the President can do this, and if he hasn't, why perhaps he hasn't done it, i.e. call Poindexter and North into the office and say, hey, boys, spill your guts, start talking. What did you know, when did you know it? What did you do, why did you do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does he have that authority, first of all, as the commander-in-chief of the military?
Well, he surely has the authority, Bob, and he could surely give it a try. On the other hand, that even within the military, except possibly in time of war, in time of war, there are certain provisions that involve the national interest. But short of that, he really could not override their constitutional rights, even though they're in uniform. But what disturbs me as a military person about it is that the military people themselves, considering the critical nature of this to the nation's morale, if you will, and everything, I'm a little disturbed that they would pick up the Fifth Amendment. In other words, exactly, I would have. Now, it's easy for me to say this because I'm not Ollie North, and I'm not the person that might get thrown in jail. Okay, so let me just be very candid about that. As a military person, what I dislike about it is that in lieu of falling back upon the common sense of our people, in effect, and the courts, that they pick the Fifth Amendment at a time like that. It's hard for me to understand what would be so critical to them, whereby they simply would not be able to say, well, I really could call on the Fifth Amendment, but I'm not going to do it. In other words, the fact of the matter is A, B, C, and D, and this is what happened. It could be wrong. It might be illegal. I did what I thought should be done.
Well, who has jurisdiction over these men, the military or the civilian courts? Or both?
Both.
Double jeopardy? Isn't that double jeopardy, though?
No, I don't mean both in the sense that one court could deliver a verdict and then the other could reverse it, or that they could be exposed to double jeopardy in the courtroom. I don't mean that. But I mean they have this is a little complicated for me, and with my limited knowledge of the technicalities of law. Mm-hmm. But they are both, well, one of them, for one thing, is retired. He's not on active duty. Poindexter was not on active duty, right?
Oh, no, he is on active duty. He was just demoted. Poindexter's on active duty.
I thought that he was temporarily relieved. Well, yes, he has a rank, but he's still on active. Active status.
To my knowledge.
Well, you might be right. Maybe I'm confused on that.
Well,
but in any event, on active duty, they certainly come under the courts-martial they come under the Code of Military Justice. But the Code of Military Justice does not say that they cannot fall back on the Fifth Amendment.
Well, if you had a command and you had a couple of corporals that went into town on Saturday night and busted up a bar, and of course, the old sheriff comes along and picks them up and takes them down to the old jailhouse there. Yeah. In essence, more often than not, do they not basically ship them back to you, and you take care of them, you discipline them?
Right, yeah.
Or at least you have the authority to go to the sheriff and say, I'll take them back.
Yes, they do, and there are various agreements that have been entered into between the civil side of life and the military in this regard. And the civil authorities are almost always, not always, because if it's a civil offense, let's suppose it's a rape out there, they don't have to turn them back to the military.
Okay, but let's, just for the purpose of this conversation, use the analogy I just brought up, the bar. They'll get out and they bust up the bar. You bring them back. You're the commanding officer. And, let's complicate this a little bit. Two of them did it, but three of them were picked up. And you're not really sure who the two are.
Mm-hmm.
Can you not, within your jurisdiction as the commanding officer, bring them before you and say, okay, boys, I want to know who did this? And one of them starts to utter something about, well, under, Fifth Amendment and so forth. I don't care about the Fifth Amendment.
No, I can't do that.
I want to get to the bottom of this. There won't be any general court-martial. I just want to know who did this so that, we can pay this bar owner back. I am ordering you to tell me. Can you do that?
No, I can't. No, I can't. I have to give them the same rights that are given to any citizen.
Would it not be within your prerogative as the commanding officer to say there will not be any disciplinary action? I just want, for my own purposes, to know who did this. So I'm telling you in advance, you're not going to be court-martialed. You're not going to go to the brig, or whatever you call it in the Army. You're not going to lose rank. You're not going to lose pay. I just want to know the answer. Who did this? And that is a direct order, soldier. Who did it? Can you do that?
I'm going to hedge my answer to that. And the reason I am is that I'm not familiar with it. At my level, let's supposing as a company or battalion commander, if that soldier says, I'm sorry, sir, but I can't accept your assurance on that, then I'm going to take the fifth, and I'm not going to respond to it.
I'll put it in writing.
Then I have no alternative. No, even if I put it in writing, I have no alternative. I think, and I'm going to qualify this, Bob, because I don't want to misspeak. We have levels of jurisprudence. We have levels of within the military that go up to, for instance, the division commander and then the corps commander and so forth. And the division commander at the major general level has greater authority in this respect to waive, let's say, punishment or whatever, and thereby require that they respond to something. Now, of course, we are talking not in time of war, which enters another complication, because at that time, the Code of Military Justice takes priority for the national good over other law. In other words, the soldier, in effect, has waived certain of his constitutional rights.
Mm-hmm.
Now, however, short of time of war or something of that sort, it is my understanding that an officer at a given level, he could waive, or what's the proper terminology? He could
grant immunity.
Grant immunity. Okay, that's the word I'm groping for. He could grant immunity at some level, and at which time they would be expected to talk. But I'm not sure, and I'm not sure at what level that can be done. I'm quite sure that for instance, if I were Lieutenant Colonel Battalion Commander, I can't do that.
Probably good, though, if you're
I don't have general...
Chief,
well, you see, I don't have general courts-martial jurisdiction.
Want to take some phone calls?
Sure.
All right, let me give the phone numbers again. Hillsborough, 224-0057. There's one line open there, 224-0057. A couple of lines open in Pinellas, 393-0057. My guest, Colonel Jack Burke. Sarasota, hi, you're on the air at WPLP. Hello, Sarasota. Sarasota once. Sarasota twice. The line's still open. I'll tell you what, maybe they stepped away. I'll put it on hold and come back. St. Petersburg, you're on the air at WPLP.
Hello there, Bob.
Hi.
I try to clear up something there about weapon types. Strategic weapons are drop munitions from aircraft. And you've got your tactical, which are the honest junk.
But we have strategic missiles, sir.
Now, strategic, in that class, strategic weapons are dropped from aircraft. They can't be dropped from aircraft. And then you got your small tactical nuclear weapons and your long-range ballistic missiles. And as for the TOW, if you can hit something with it, you're doing pretty good. They're wire-guided. A wire-guided missile with about about a 10-pound warhead. And that's about it. I think the range is about 1,500 yards on that. But you got to be able to see your target first. And it leaves you highly exposed.
Exact words that Colonel Burke used during the break.
Well, yeah.
That's correct, and that's of course.
That's the same thing as using a recoilless rifle. You're exposed. And for your munitions on the TOW, the munitions that were resupplied, and this is just a guess from spending 17 years messing around with ordnance, they supplied the munitions that they used up the fastest, which was artillery, tank, and small arms and aircraft munitions, things like that.
You mean the munitions that were traded to the Iranians?
Iranians, they were.
Listen, my concern is not so much the actual munitions. They're relatively easy to obtain. You can go, to Switzerland. You can go to Monaco and deal all you want in that type of weaponry. It's those spare parts.
It's the caliber of the weapons you got to think of now. Everybody has different calibers.
Well, I appreciate that, but it's the spare parts to get those helicopters and planes back in the air that would concern me the most, as opposed to the actual number and types of, for the want of a better word, we'll call them bullets, even big bullets.
Yeah.
They're relatively easy to come by.
And another thing I'd like to comment, you're talking about the Soviet Union entering Iran. The only way we could possibly do anything is achieve air superiority first.
Yeah.
And we can't do that. We'd have to talk the Chinese into opening up a third front. That's the only way we could win anything. Because we'd tie up, I don't know how many hundreds of divisions on the Chinese front.
Well, obviously, for the Soviets to go into Iran is the start of World War III, and if that's what they wanted to do, there are much easier ways of doing it. Much easier ways of doing it.
True. But that may not start World War III. You don't really know.
I think the risk is pretty high, higher than I'd like to take.
We're outnumbered about 5-1. Oh, another thing I'd like to bring up about these munitions and stuff. We have built in our munitions a 10% dud ratio. 1 out of 10 will not work. Period. That's it. They'll fail to function.
Of what kind of munitions, though? 1 out of 10 wouldn't work.
Any. Artillery, hand grenades, TOWs, rockets, you name it. I picked up thousands of that stuff all over the place.
I wouldn't be surprised. It would depend upon whether or not the rotation process has been observed, whether we have the money and whether we have the means of rotating stock the way that it's supposed to be. So it wouldn't be unlikely on a sample basis if 1 out of 10, 1 out of 10 other than rifle rounds.
Incredibly high?
Yeah, I'll give you a typical example. I was in Vietnam 68, 69, and I was in, you've heard of EOD, haven't you, Colonel?
Sure, yeah.
I was EOD then, and we picked up 8-inch projectiles that were shelled into a village that's laying on the ground, drop munitions, bombs, that were just laying all over the place when they dropped them in. They wouldn't go off. Fuses wouldn't work if it just failed to function.
Well, but an artillery shell is a relatively uncomplicated mechanism, is it not?
It depends. Now, it may be uncomplicated, but with the standard point detonating fuse, you got quick and you got super quick. Then it may just malfunction. They just don't work, period.
But my point is, if you go to the store to buy a carburetor, I doubt very much, at least I hope not, that the automobile makers are sending out carburetors with a 1 in 10 factor built in that 1 in 10 is going to fail. And it seems to me that a carburetor should be a hell of a lot more complicated mechanism than an artillery shell. Or am I just being foolish, young boy here?
Well, PD fusing, you got mechanical time and VT fusing and all that.
You have proximity fusing is considerably more complicated than that.
Yeah, a little tiny radio.
And you're telling me that I'm being a foolish young boy.
Yeah.
Well, a modern artillery round, depending on the type you're talking about, can be a fairly complex. It's a fairly complex mechanism, and if indeed the storage is number one is not correct. And number two, if stocks are not rotated adequately, then you can have a situation in which 1 out of 10 will not. Whether or not that applies Army-wide, though, I don't know. I've never seen a figure on it.
In Yuma Proving Grounds, we're down there at Clear Range down there, and we walked up onto about a dozen 155 illumination rounds that failed to function.
Caller, I must move along, but I thank you much.
Yeah.
Pinellas 393-0057, one line open. Hillsborough 224-0057. Clearwater, you're on the air, WPLP.
like to ask the Colonel a few questions about the SDI program.
Sure.
Are you familiar with it, sir?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. It is a defense. Ideally, it is a defense program. Am I correct?
Yes, that's what it's intended to be, and what it basically is.
Okay. So, could you kind of fill me in exactly how it would work?
Depends upon. Well, it will depend upon what particular plan, so to speak, or what particular system is adopted.
Is it fair to say
how
that
it works?
SDI, as it stands right now, is still pretty much of a conceptual idea, and no one today has any idea really as to what it will end up being?
I would qualify that by saying that it is conceptual when it comes to the more exotic, far-out, 10-year technology. Example, it is conceptual as far as capability to put a space platform in space with a laser gun, so to speak, mounted on it, all right, which is capable of intercepting a Soviet missile.
And let them float around there and hope that the Soviet missiles would crash into them and explode.
Oh, it's more than hope they would crash into them. In fact, it's been, we have had 2 or 3 dramatic demonstrations of a capability to intercept a missile in space.
Yeah, but we knew exactly where it was going to be at the precise second it was going to be there.
No. It was picked up on radar. It was picked up exactly the way that an incoming enemy missile would be picked up. And indeed, as a matter of fact, interestingly enough, the counter missile, that is the projectile that was sent up into space after it, was deliberately sent 20 miles off course to see whether or not the homing and sensing device would bring it back on course, and it did. And it did. It not only... It has a several-foot wide umbrella that opens up, in other words, just in case you didn't hit it head-on. But in both experiments, as a matter of fact, the projectile launched, intercepted, and hit on the nose, okay, the incoming missile, the incoming warhead. In other words, a bullet hit a bullet. And that's been demonstrated several times.
Okay, so theoretically, let's say eventually we make a Star defense program that will work. Wouldn't that eliminate all nuclear weapons in, let's say, in Europe? We wouldn't need to put any nuclear weapons in Europe or anywhere else, would we?
Sure. You'd still need them, whether or not in Europe or not. A lot would depend there upon what agreement is made with the Soviets as far as removing all of them. And earlier on, we had a discussion of what that means in terms of conventional defense capability. The SDI effort itself has never been stated as being something that will, within our lifetime or the foreseeable future, eliminate the need for a ballistic missile deterrence capability. In other words, it has never been said that SDI or an ABM capability, anti-ballistic missile capability, could stand on its own as a complete defense. That has never been stated.
Unfortunately, Colonel, it has. Really, it
should not have.
It's in essence what Ronald Reagan and unfortunately Danny Graham have used as a selling point.
No. Danny Graham, and I have this in writing. In fact, I have his booklet right here in my file folder. Danny Graham has never said that SDI is a substitute for a deterrent capability.
Well, he has said in the very same words that Ronald Reagan has said. He has said it would put an end.
Eventually?
I don't remember him using the word eventually, and I don't remember Ronald Reagan using the word eventually.
No.
I mean, I'm thinking of those cute little ads that High Frontier ran, those nice little cartoons, and they said emphatically, and I know it was a misstatement, I appreciate that, and I know that they were talking to a relatively ignorant, and that's not a derogatory term, American public, in the most simple terms, but in order to sell this program to the American people, they said it will put an end to the threat of nuclear war. Period. Bam. Simple. Over and over.
Oh, well, now that's another statement. I thought what we were talking about is put an end to the need to have, for a long time to come, some counter-strike capability with ballistic missiles. They have never said that. You mean what you said,
well,
Bob?
You're splitting hairs.
No, that's not a hair split.
Well, hear me out. They were painting with a broad brush. The implication was awfully clear in those very short, simplistic little messages. The implication was incredibly clear. It's going to put an end to all these terrible bombs and missiles.
No, it would put an end to the MAD, mutual assured destruction philosophy of today. That's what it would put an end to.
Colonel,
in other words, a hair trigger situation in which you have a strike capability, a massive first strike capability on one side, and a second strike capability on another, presumably, and so forth. That's what they're talking about. I do not recall a single word that I have seen, and certainly not in print, by Danny Graham, and I listened to him on Talk Radio WPLP one time, too. And I do not recall him having said that
but
this
he knew
thing,
who he was talking to,
that this thing in the field will put an end to nuclear missiles or nuclear weaponry.
I have. I'm sorry to tell you.
Okay, I would totally disagree with that.
You're talking about the day that he was on with me, and he unfortunately found out who I was before before the program.
I've forgotten who he was on with, yeah.
I've heard him talk to other people in Miami where he said the most incredibly stupid things that one can imagine. I mean, including such things as if you're really concerned about nuclear fallout, just go out and sit under an orange tree. That'll absorb it. I'm not making this stuff up. Danny Graham can get really loose with his lips when he thinks that who he's talking to is not going to challenge him.
But I think, well, I have not heard, I'm sure I have not heard, and I have not read, especially I have not heard every single word that Danny Graham has said to somebody at one time or another. And so therefore I'm not about to try to explain what I have not heard.
Well,
I do know what has been put in writing by the High Frontier Group and by the other groups which have recommended, scientists, engineers, technicians, and the whole bit, who, and including Professor Jastrow and the rest of them, who have stood behind the SDI effort. And what they have said is entirely different than the general conception of the public is getting on the thing.
Absolutely, but you're talking about reading information and perhaps even attending seminars where they knew they were talking to people that had some concept as to what the real story was.
Well, you're saying they exaggerate the...
oversimplify it.
Oversimplify it? Well,
I mean,
could be.
If we were to implement Star Wars and have it flying tomorrow, we would not take away one bomb, we would not take away one missile, because no one in his right mind is going to counsel the president to cross your fingers and hope this thing works. When those missiles start flying, no one's going to say, well, sit back, Mr. President, and wait till the last conceivable minute, and let's see if this thing can't knock them all out. When those missiles start flying, we're going to start flying ours, too. It's not going to change anything.
The concept, Bob, is to, among other things, the immediate near-term practicality. Practicality, right now, on the ground, on the shelf, is a capability to intercept and defeat ballistic missiles. Right now. It can be done in mid-space, it can be done in near space, and it can be done in point defense on the ground. And it can be done with kinetic energy, and it does not have to be done with either lasers, nor particle beams, nor, above all, nuclear explosion.
Does the off-the-shelf hardware that you're talking about now have the capability of distinguishing between dummies and actual warheads?
To a degree, yeah.
A ball bearing floating in space can detect the difference between a dummy warhead and a real warhead?
No, we're talking about a sensor capability. The projectiles we're talking about have a sensor capability, and the sensor capability is linked to a computer capability, which in turn has been programmed to identify certain kinds of things versus other kinds of things. Another thing is that if you're using something that is a 30-millimeter Gatling gun, in effect, 30-millimeter Gatling gun, you're not even talking, it's very advanced, but it's very advanced in terms of the point defense hardware, point defense radar. And you're talking about something that can intercept an incoming warhead that we have now, that can actually do it right now, and that we wouldn't even put this in the field? What we're saying is we will not put in the field today a capability that we already have.
Well, okay, but there's still another problem, too. Let's assume that everything that you said is true, and I don't know that it isn't. I'm going to assume that it is. I know you. You're a fine, honorable gentleman. I will take at face value everything you say and assume it's totally true. But there's another dimension here, and that is that this is an escalation. The Soviets are certainly not going to sit on their hands. They're going to do everything in their power to do two things, primarily. First of all, get enough weapons up there in the sky that it would overwhelm such a system. And secondly, try to figure out some way, and certainly the capability, technology exists, to have counter forces up there to knock these things out before they're ever even used. It's just nothing more than a wild escalation, entering into a new, dangerous, uncharted field. Right now we have the MAD philosophy, mutual assured destruction, which, as you have already pointed out, this pretty much throws this out the window. So a whole new concept, a whole new defensive strategy has to be born. Is not the risk of all of this does this not far outweigh any possible benefit?
No.
To a space shield that might, at best, wildest guess, eliminate 90% of the incoming weapons?
What percent? Well, let me take the last statement first. What percent do you want it to eliminate before you would be willing to put it in the field?
Well, because there are other ways of delivering weapons, I don't think even 100% is acceptable, because if we were to put up a system that was capable of eliminating 100%, absolutely for sure, just no question about it, incoming, dropping from outer space, nuclear warheads, then the Soviets would simply find a different way of delivering them.
Is it worth their while to find a different way to deliver it if they don't have a first strike capability?
But, Colonel, they would have no choice. The Soviets are a very paranoid people. If the Soviets had such a system, we would assume that the reason they had that system is because they wanted to shield themselves from a retaliatory attack that we were getting ready for a first strike on them.
What they want to do, and the reason that they're so hysterical about the SDI effort, they have the most fundamental danger that we have in the world today with regard to nuclear weapons. And it is absolutely fundamental to the entire issue is the question of a first strike capability with strategic ballistic missiles. That is absolutely fundamental to the entire equation.
Well, both nations have a first strike capability.
No, we don't. No, we don't. They do. No, we don't. We have a second strike capability. We do not have the capability. We do not have the capability to launch an effective first strike capability against a Soviet missile capability.
But the MX missile is a first strike missile.
How many MX? It is not a first strike. How many?
It's a deadly accurate missile, is it not?
It is deadly accurate.
It is designed to hit a silo, not a city.
How many of them are even programmed? Compared to the number, the Soviets have 6,000 warheads that they can deliver for first strike capability.
I don't know, but we certainly have the capability of, sending them out there in a real hurry. We have the technology. All we have to do is start up the factory lines, the assembly lines. It's a first strike weapon. It's designed to hit a silo, not a city.
Being able to hit a silo doesn't make it a first strike weapon. What makes something a first strike weapon is when you have a total strategic capability to be absolutely assured when you deliver the first strike that you will take out any capability for a second strike.
But there's no need to develop a weapon that can hit a silo if it's not intended to be used to hit that silo before that silo is used, i.e. a first strike.
No. Supposing you have 50 MX missiles. 50. Isn't that the number that's presently programmed?
I believe.
All right.
I think that's accurate.
How does this compare with an SS-18 capability, which under the SALT Treaty, it could carry about 20 warheads, but under the SALT Treaty they carry 10. This is 3,080 land-based, heavy lift, direct capability, land-based. You don't have to communicate at sea with it as you do with a submarine.
How many warheads on the MX? Are there not 10 on that as well?
Well, if you put 10 on, what have you got with 50? 500?
500.
You have 3,080, and that doesn't include the SS-19, which is another 2,900.
Couldn't you do irreparable damage to the Soviet Union by hitting 500 targets dead on the nose?
No, because their next strike capability is so great. It would only take, for them to make a first strike, would take only 25% of their actually nuclear strike capability today. 25% of it. They would have 3/4 of it left in which to counterstrike anything that you did, Bob.
But I think, aren't we talking here with, in essence, you're saying that I've got a 28-ounce bat and you've got a 34-ounce bat, and I'm going to hit you over the head with my 28-ounce bat, and you're going to hit me over the head with a 34-ounce bat. We're both going to be dead.
No, because we're talking about a quantum difference. It's so great that the blackmail effect will work. If I have a strike capability that is vastly greater than yours is, in terms of accuracy, in terms of numbers, in terms of range, in terms of throw weight, and everything else, and I can deliver upon every single strategic missile strike site you've got several warheads with one single strike, and we have no such capability at all, then wouldn't you be just a little bit deterred from ever engaging at all?
Well, I think I would be deterred that knowing that you're going to know 20 minutes in advance that I'm coming, and that you still have at least 500
it's not enough
deadly weapons that you can drop on my nation.
But you're not going to drop them on your nation if I have a third strike capability that the Soviets have to utterly demolish not only our military sites, not only the command and control centers, but
Colonel
about...
Burke, there's no need for a third strike. After you drop 3,000 on me and I drop 500 on you, it's so all over anyway.
No, it isn't. No, that's it. The Soviets can absorb that.
The Soviets could absorb 500 nuclear weapons?
Sure.
Colonel Burke, I have all the respect in the world for you, but that to me sounds like an utterly absurd statement.
No, that's correct. They no doubt could. You mean they could absorb it only with losing 20 million lives? That's true.
20 million lives, every major city, every major industrial center, every major transportation hub?
It's not enough. No.
No, if they wanted to live in caves for the next 100 years, yeah, I guess they could absorb it.
No. The strategic missile forces, insofar as our planning is concerned, are directed against basically military targets and command and control centers. We do not have enough to ever even think about a peremptory strike against the Soviet Union. They do. They have enough to strike, to wait for our counterstrike, and issue the third one with 3/4 of the nuclear weaponry that they have, which would be sufficient to utterly demolish every single thing that we have.
Well, Colonel Burke, if what you're saying to me is true, then the Soviets must be absolute lunatics not to do it tonight. If they could wipe us out and absorb our retaliation and only lose, as you said, 20 million people, not be bombed back into the Stone Age, if their intention is to take over the world, and if the only thing blocking them is the United States of America, then I think the Soviets must be the biggest jerks on the face of the earth that have ever been known on the face of the earth not to do it tonight.
Well, so?
So in other words, I don't believe you.
No, all right, fine. That is the capability that they are building, and that is exactly what it is, Bob. They are building a first strike capability. A first strike does not mean that they will not get a retaliatory blow if it comes. It means that the effect of knowing that they could accomplish that first strike is much too great for anybody to engage in it, which is precisely what they're after. What they're after is to make sure that there is never a nuclear exchange, and they get their way anyway. This is a mammoth, this is a mammoth riverboat gamble type of thing that we're engaged in here, and the question would be who blinks first, and who's the danger is instability, and the instability comes about when one side has a credible first strike capability. That's when the danger begins.
The Soviets and the Americans have lived under various different arms control agreements now for quite a number of years. While there may be some technical violations on both sides, but for the purpose of this conversation, we'll say the Soviet side, there may be some technical violations. They have lived within the spirit of those agreements in terms of the number of launch vehicles and warheads, to our best knowledge, and apparently our knowledge is pretty damn good. So in other words, they have not increased their strike force for
they have.
half a dozen, possibly even a decade, half a dozen years, a decade?
Yes, they have. They've increased it within their interpretation of the SALT treaties. Yes, they have.
Not major launch vehicles capable of leaving the central part of the Soviet Union and landing in Wyoming.
They have an SS-25. They have an SS-25 mobile missile system in the field, which is a strategic capability weapon, and which absolutely violates the SALT Treaty. By the way, the SALT Treaty was never approved by the United States Congress anyway. It isn't a treaty.
I appreciate that.
Why are we observing a treaty
which... countries have lived within
why are we observing... Why do we keep talking about the observance of a treaty that does not exist as a treaty? Which, by the way, is unconstitutional also.
Well, it's not unconstitutional. It's not unconstitutional for two countries to make an informal agreement and stick to it.
It is unconstitutional for people to tell the American people that we are in the process of observing a treaty which doesn't exist, and we are in the and that
We're
indeed our entire
the spirit of the treaty.
Well, the spirit of the treaty. The difference between the so-called letter and spirit of the treaty in this case is enormous. The Soviets have, in fact, put in the field, as I started to say, an SS-25 missile, which is an utter violation. It is a quantum violation of the SALT Treaty. It is not a modification of the SS-13. They were permitted one new missile system. They have got two new missile systems, the SX-24 and the SS-25. The SS-25 is at least 10-to-1 beyond the parameters that are permitted by the SALT treaties. Now, would you call that a minor variation? A minor violation? Why is it a minor violation for them when in other words, we're forever shooting the messenger. The reason that verification doesn't make any difference is once you verify, nobody believes it or accepts it and says it's just a minor violation.
Allow me to ask you this question in all humility. You obviously know a hell of a lot more about this than I do. It's, a way that you made your living. It's not a way I make mine. I'm just a mere mortal, and I ask this question in all sincerity and humility. The gentlemen who negotiated that treaty that isn't a treaty have said repeatedly that the only violations that the Soviets can be accused of are basically semantics, basically minor technical violations, that they have lived within the general parameters of the agreement.
No, some of them have. That's not what Paul Nietzsche said.
Well,
what
my point is, how can there be such a tremendous difference of agreement amongst Americans?
Because of ideological mindset, Bob. The particular crew, the people in this country, whether they be previous SALT negotiators or whether they be State Department people or whether they be defense, whoever they are, including, by the way, some people in the so-called conservative military-industrial complex, for that matter, are constantly saying things of the kind that you talk about. And yet, when you look up the record of the SALT agreements, and by the way, the ABM agreement, on paper, as to what was agreed to, as to what the national technical means of identification, in other words, the surveillance means that we count on, are now telling us they violated it. Then why are these people who negotiated these treaties, and this includes, for instance, Admiral Squidge Lee out here somewhere, who was involved in the SALT II process, as I understand it, why are they saying that these are non-existent or minor violations when, in fact, some of the best technical minds in the country and some of the people involved in the process are saying that they are not minor technical variations? They are not living up to the spirit of the thing. If you produce a whole new missile system, which is above and beyond what you're permitted, and your own technical means, the very ones we're depending upon for verification, I'm told by people, by the so-called left-wing element or whatever, that we can verify anything. Now, once we verify it, then we shoot the messenger and say that isn't so. And then what we do, we go to somebody who is involved, whose ego is involved in that particular treaty, who's not about to back off of it, and this includes Secretary McNamara, for instance, going back not to the treaty itself, but going back into times when he was Secretary of Defense. Why are they consistently saying things that are contrary to the facts and contrary to the logic of the situation?
I don't know, Colonel Burke, and I'm very confused. I love my nation, and I want my nation to be able to continue on indefinitely into the future. But when I look around and I see the people who are screaming, the commies have done this, the commies have done that, they're breaking this, they can't be trusted, etc., more often than not, I find a direct link between that spokesman, that individual, and the arms industry. I don't want to sit here and sound like, a screaming, crazy 1960s radical that the world is filled with conspiracies and military-industrial complexes are under every bed and so forth and so on. I don't want to be put into that category, because I find those people to be lunatics too, thank you. But so often it seems to me that the ones who are screaming the loudest are those who make their living off the sale of weapons directly or indirectly. And it boggles my mind that men, and this is a field of which I know nothing. I'm just a mere mortal. And yet I see men who would appear to me to be good, decent, honorable men saying, hogwash, that isn't true. We are as guilty of as many technical violations as they are guilty of technical violations. And as a matter of fact, the thing that I hear the most screaming and moaning about, is a radar installation, not vast new numbers of delivery vehicles. And I'm confused. I'm extremely confused. I have all the respect in the world for you, sir. And I trust you know that. We're pretty friendly.
Oh yes, I don't take any of this personally.
Well, good, because none of it is meant personally. But I am absolutely bewildered and confused how there can be so much misunderstanding and disagreement amongst ourselves. If what you are saying to me is the absolute gospel truth, it would seem to me to be folly on the part of Ronald Reagan or Jimmy Carter or whoever the next guy is in the office to have anything to do with these people.
To have anything to do with what?
The Soviets.
In terms of treaty arrangements, you mean?
Exactly.
Or negotiation?
Precisely.
Well,
either they're honorable men to a degree or they're totally dishonorable. It's got to be one or the other. If they're dishonorable, then what the hell are we talking to them for?
Bob, I can only base my opinions. First of all, I am not an either covert or overt observer on the ground, standing there looking directly at a Soviet missile system or a Soviet radar. Obviously, I am picking up my information from the written word in the written press. I am not, and I do not have at present an updated security clearance even, because in my work, as I've discussed with you before, I don't want to be under that handicap. I'm not reading classified documents. I'm reading the open press that is available to other people. Now, it is true that I'm looking
you're talking
at this,
about technical journals and things of this nature, not
only technical. Not only technical. I'm talking about the Strategic Institute Review is not all that technical. After all, National Review by your friend and my friend William Buckley is hardly a highly technical journal. With recently, in the past issue, as a matter of fact, a marvelous article by Jastrow, who's professor of earth sciences, as you know, at Dartmouth, who was the founder of the Goddard Space Institute, whose credentials are absolutely unquestionable, and who from the very beginning of this whole thing has said, look, facts are facts, data is data, and these are the facts regardless of ideological objections to them.
But is he not the type of individual that I spoke of with a direct or indirect financial link to the arms industry?
Oh, of course not. Jastrow, why would Jastrow have a
is he not working in a university within a department that is receiving Defense Department funds?
Why would that have? Why would you think that the people who take these positions as to what the data says about Soviet systems are willing to go on record with the data, mathematically, scientifically, and otherwise? They put the data right out in front of people. We're not just talking here about abstracts. All right. Why would we assume, or why would we even think that they, therefore, are doing something to line their own pockets or whatever have you, as different from the objectors? By the way, a good number of the objectors happen to belong to the military-industrial complex that is engaged in the building of guess what? B-1 bombers, MX missiles, Midget Man missiles, and Trident 5 submarines. In other words, the bureaucratic objection that is slowing down Reagan in implementation of this, of all things, comes from the military bureaucracy. Many of the people I'm talking about who made up the original High Frontier team, for instance, they were totally independent. They had no funding from the government whatsoever. They had no connection with industry or government whatsoever, except they may be retired, from one government office or another. And these people, initially some 30 of some of the top people in the country in this area, are precisely the ones that put this High Frontier thing together.
I had Danny Graham tell me that High Frontier's money came basically from the defense industry.
No, it didn't.
That's what he told me on this station.
That its money came from it is an independent. It's an independent group of people that spent their own money.
I appreciate it's an independent group of people, but the contributors are basically people within the defense industry.
No. Oh, people.
Chairman of the board of this company, president of that, senior vice president of the other.
No, wait a minute. There are an awful lot of people that are not president, vice president, chairman of the board of anything, who are first-class scientists, first-class engineers, first-class physicists, and so forth, that were engaged in this High Frontier effort. I'm a personal friend of one of them, who is, in fact, was a assistant secretary of defense for INA, international whatever, at the time that I first met him, who was a graduate of the Naval Academy, was one time a Navy officer, is a nuclear physicist, and who, however, later went into a totally independent, at his own cost, that is, without any reimbursement, into this effort. And there's a great number out there.
St. Petersburg Heating and Air Conditioning wants to help you save money this winter. Call them today.
St. Petersburg Heating and Air Conditioning puts your home in the comfort zone.
St. Petersburg Heating and Air Conditioning. Look for them in the yellow pages.
The time back. We being myself, Bob Lassiter, my guest, Colonel Jack Burke, retired U.S. Army. Colonel Burke, we've got about 4.5 minutes here before the end of the segment in the President's speech. I listen to what you say. I listen to what we talk about during the breaks, which frequently is even more lively than on the air. And I want to be a nice guy. I want to believe everything that I hear. I hear so many conflicting things. And there's another problem, too. I grew up in an era where year after year after year after year, at budget time, military men came before the Congress and screamed and moaned about windows of vulnerability and all kinds of mixing up of apples and oranges in order to get appropriations for more weapon systems that time has come to tell us were, frankly, to be as kind about it as I can, exaggerations. They were, frankly, lies that we have come to find out. Why should I believe now that you're telling you, that's an editorial you, that you're telling me the truth? Why should I now be so concerned that the Soviets are doing this, the Soviets are doing that, the Soviets have this, they're 2 days away from having that? It's all just a bit much.
Now, the errors in, or the exaggerations, whichever, to which you refer, go back to a couple of periods in history when
50s and 60s primarily.
When yes, in the 60s, you're right. In which the technical means of intercept, of photo imagery, of sensors, all of this kind of technology was really very crude compared to what it is today. And at that time, a lot of interpretations were made. For one thing, interestingly enough, there was a great big battle that forever went on between the CIA and the Air Force at the time. In other words, the Air Force saying, hey, listen, this is really what the situation is, and the CIA saying this, and each of them fighting for turf, in effect, as far as their surveillance and intelligence systems were concerned. There was, in fact, at one point, anything, call it a lie if you wish, but more likely a gross overestimation, which the Soviets fed, as a matter of fact. They fed data into the system in order to encourage this because they were concerned at the time of our
but I think what I'm talking
nuclear superiority. But you're saying, you see, first of all, you're painting a picture in which this is habitually true. I would deny that.
But even today,
that is not true. Most of the estimates, in fact, the more recent estimates in the past 10 years that have been made have greatly understated the Soviet capability.
But even to this day, and I'm going to make a really wild oversimplification here, we have people coming before the Senate saying, oh my God, the Soviets have 397 three-seat bombers and we only have 154. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, we also have 600 four-seat bombers that nobody bothered to mention. Mm-hmm. So I've got to have more three-seat bombers. And that's going on even to this day, Colonel.
In fact, it is now generally conceded that we had a very serious situation ever since the SALT treaties, in fact, that have come about because of that. Let me ask you something about this business of needing money for weapons.
I wish I could.
Why not do away with the MX system and go for the SDI capability?
Tell you what, how about if we answer that the next time?
All right.
Because as always happens with you, we run out of time in the middle of a conversation. I find you a fascinating man. I sincerely apologize to the full board of callers who never did get on, and to all of you who tried to get in and didn't get on. Maybe next time. I promise I'll try to be better. I'm always very selfish with Colonel Jack Burke. Colonel, thank you ever so much.
My pleasure, Bob. I always enjoy being with you and talking to you.
Ronald Reagan makes his speech coming up in about...
Hello, Fred.
20 minutes after the hour of 9 o'clock. Welcome back. We'll devote the remainder of this program to your thoughts, comments, whatever, on the presidential speech tonight. Obviously, an extremely important speech for Mr. Reagan. He started out by saying, I've been silent for the past 3 months. I felt it was improper to come before you with sketchy information. He lifted but one line out of the Tower report, the line that read, the board is indeed convinced that the president wants the full truth to come out. He did not, of course, refer to the line in the report that said the president actively tried to keep the truth from coming out. In speaking about the arms sale to Iran, he still contends that he can't remember whether it was before or after the fact that he approved the sale. That it is an extraordinary admission, or, well, the worst, just not the truth. He spoke very highly of Howard Baker, but of course made no apology for Donald Reagan. He spoke very highly of William Webster as his nominee for the CIA post, but of course made no mention whatsoever of the man
who he did initially nominate, Robert Gates, and his connection in the entire affair. And he said that covert policies in the future would be in compliance with American values. But he did not say they would be in compliance with American law. What did he say? I'm not sure what it was that the president said tonight. Is he more concerned with what went wrong, or is he more concerned with his image? I think it is fair to say he is more concerned with his image, but that in and of itself may not be all bad, because that is the way the president governs. He governs by image. He governs by attitude. And he's very, very concerned about it. This is a very mortally wounded president. It will never quite be the same. Not just because of the Iran-Contra affair. The president's influence was clearly eroding back in November, when his choices for senatorial and congressional seats were clearly rejected by the American people, quickly followed on the heels of this. The president is a very popular man. He may continue to be a very popular man. He will just not be a very influential man for the remainder of his term. Let me give you the telephone numbers in Hillsborough: 224-0057, 224-0057, Pinellas, 393-0057. What did he say? Did he change your mind? I doubt it very much. If you're a pro-Reagan person, I suspect that you're more pro-Reagan tonight than you've ever been. If you're anti-Reagan, I suspect you're more anti than you have ever been. I'm not sure what we heard. I'm not sure why we heard it. Now I'd like to hear from you. Clearwater, hi, you're on the air at WPLP.
Yes, I found the president's speech impressive, even though I don't agree with him. And but I was more interested in discussing your previous guest.
Well, I'm not the least bit interested in discussing my previous guest. We're talking about the presidential speech that we just had on.
And were you impressed with it?
Are you asking me?
Yes. Did you find him...
I just went through 7 minutes of it, sir. Tampa, you're on the air at WPLP.
Hello, Bob.
Yes, sir.
Ronald Reagan tonight gave a very good performance. The man came out, and he just went out in front of the cameras. Production crew was great. He did a great job, but still, you know, he's really not saying anything that is, that has any substance to it. People are still going to do the same thing. All he's saying is he's shuffling around a few people, moving furniture, as he called it, and he really hasn't said anything substantial at all. And I just hope that the American public doesn't buy this speech. It sounds good. It makes him look good. Okay, the Tower, John Tower is now on some board that he appointed. But I don't know. I just don't buy the whole speech at all, Bob. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, thank you much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hard-pressed to think of anything that has been more heralded, more weighted, more awaited than the speech tonight. And I'm not sure that I heard anything at all, one way or the other. I'm not sure that I heard a great deal to criticize. I'm not sure that I heard anything to praise. But for something that has been as heralded as the speech was, I feel as though I've been cheated. Tampa, you're on the air at WPLP.
I think, Bob, when things are all looked at and done with, people are going to look at this as yet another step in the cover-up. I think he got on there and lied again. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but his first...
What do you think he lied to you about?
First, about his intentions during the 3 months he's laid low out of concern for the American people. He had stuck his foot in his mouth so many times the days shortly after the revelation that they buried him to keep him from doing it again.
That's a good point.
He didn't do it out of concern for us. Right when he said that, I started thinking, oh, my God, he's going to do it again. And, again, I still find it very unbelievable that he knew nothing about any secret accounts. But again...
Well, in my wildest dreams, and I'm sure in your wildest dreams, you could not have expected the president to come on the air and say, hey, I'm a jerk, you're criticizing me.
Well, I don't think...
You're right in criticizing me. I'm a fool, and I'm just going to go hide under a rock. I wouldn't have expected that, but I think I should have expected a little more concern for what really went wrong than I heard tonight.
So I think he should have been more conciliatory. I still think that I still don't think he has taken it like a man, if that's what if people have expected him to do. This wasn't it. He didn't come out and apologize. He didn't go far enough to right this wrong. And again, they showed something just on CBS right after where they showed Howard Baker. And I think on his first day, Howard Baker was dancing and hemming and hawing and maybe doing a little line himself when saying he's known Reagan since 1966 and he's never seen him look more energetic. Come on. You know, who's he? I mean, I know maybe you're allowed to do a little puffing, I guess, as the advertisers call it, but Reagan is, it appears to me again that he's out of touch. This speech was terrible. And it's certainly not the Ronald Reagan of old, whatever that means, the PR Ronald Reagan. He's a great campaigner, a great politician, but no substance.
Well, all week long we've heard that this is the most important speech of the president's entire political life, and if indeed that's the case, I feel cheated. I feel very cheated with what I heard tonight.
I agree. I got prepared to sit down for a few minutes thinking that he was going to really, you know, at least try to sell me, at least make a good pitch, and it wasn't even a good pitch.
I heard nothing more than little apple polishing, trying to restore a little bit of sheen to his own good image, and beyond that, I didn't really come away, and maybe I'm being biased here, maybe I'm being prejudiced. I just didn't come away with any reassurance that the president has a command of the full impact of what has happened.
He doesn't, and again, at least he spared us the anecdotes. I was waiting for a story somewhere along the way, and he almost went into one, but thank God he didn't. But again, he's you know, I think I think he's aged an awful lot, and I think he just doesn't have the spark. And you know, people again will tell you he's not your average 76-year-old man. But if you look at it that way, the average 76-year-old man has probably been dead about 6 years, given the life expectancy of the average male. So he's old by anybody's standards, very old. And you know, the old Mondale line, I won't bring it up if you won't, that's beautiful. And
well, it is extraordinary that we have a president who is at least 4 years beyond the age that we feel a man is capable of running an elevator. Well, I don't really mean that to be as cruel as it may sound, but that happens to be the society that we live in.
Oh, and again, I think you're right, and I think age is a very much an issue now. People are always afraid to talk about it and say it's a cheap shot. Remember, a few years back, that was considered a cheap shot to bring up his age. But now, I certainly think it needs to be questioned. I think his competency needs to be questioned as the president. Maybe even as a member of society. I don't know. I don't know how far gone he is. Read about Woodrow Wilson if you have a chance, about the last days of his presidency. Laid up in bed, a victim of a stroke, and the only messages to the press and to the outside world being ferried by his wife.
Well, there's no denying that the president is in remarkably good health and has energy far, far beyond his years, and in many respects he's probably in much better health than I am, and I'm 30-some years younger than he.
No doubt.
But the fact remains that the president is an elderly man. He is 76 years old and has the most demanding job in the entire nation.
That's right. And undoubtedly, and the laid-back 5 hours, you know, a day style and the extended vacation style, I don't think cuts it. And
I mean, one of the things that I found most troubling in the Tower report were the references to the president's inattention to, and we've heard so many reports on this from various different independent sources, some of them even conservative Republicans, that the president at times just appears to be out of touch.
Absolutely, and I think Muskie on Face the Nation the other day was brutally honest, and he said things that I'd never heard said about him. You know.
Well, Henry Kissinger said something that was just absolutely devastating. He said, and I'll try to paraphrase as closely as I can, when at first you meet Ronald Reagan, you're at once struck with how did anybody think this man could, you know, be governor of California, let alone president of the United States.
It's a testament to his campaigning ability. He is, I tell you, at the outset in a political campaign where you can't get very deep, he's fantastic. Looking at him very shallowly and looking at him, you know, not looking very deep, he's beautiful. But when you got to dig in the guts, and I think when it takes guts, he shows flaws in his character.
Thank you much, caller.
All right, Bob. Thank you.
9:30 the time. Of course, again, very, very disappointing tonight, but a very fundamental problem here. The president has still made no effort whatsoever to explain, beyond the most superficial that I was concerned with the hostages, this inane policy of dealing with the Ayatollah Khomeini, a man who was directly responsible for the deaths of at least 241 Marines in Beirut, Lebanon, a man who the president called within the last 6 months one of the 3 terrorist leaders in the world, And there is no explanation for this, and I think we deserve an explanation. It's awfully nice to hear that he's going to move some furniture around and reappoint some people. That's all fine and well. That's necessary, and I applaud those actions. But nonetheless, there was a tremendous and incredible, fundamentally bad policy that unfortunately the president has yet to address, has given no indication that he ever will address, and actually went so far tonight as to tell us that he won't address it. He's going to move on. Well, he's not going to move on. These are questions that remain. These are questions that Ronald Reagan will have to deal with, especially if he has any hope whatsoever of regaining any of his influence in Washington. 2 lines open. They're both in Pinellas, 393-0057. Safety Harbor. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi, Bob. How are you doing?
Doing fine.
Bob, I just listened to the speech, too, and my concern, very simply, is that I don't think the president really addressed the crucial issue, and that is that it appears that we had a military operating out of the White House that literally was trying to pull a military coup on this country. I say that, not trying to be facetious or not trying to play with words or anything, but when we had a Marine lieutenant colonel literally operating in the name of this country and calling presidents of countries and shifting arms back and forth and calling policies, and an admiral who turns around and just refuses to testify before the Senate, it's very, very scary. And this president has simply refused to deal with that. That admiral is still an admiral. He, according to the newspapers, he was just demoted from a vice admiral to a rear admiral, and a Marine lieutenant colonel who is still operating in the Marine Corps. Those people should be drummed out of the military permanently. I mean, they should have lost their military position, period. They tried to take our country away from us. And to me, it's scary. And for the president to simply say, oops, I'm sorry, I goofed, this was a mistake, and I'll accept the responsibility, does not address the issue of what was really going on in their White House. They literally try to operate a secret government behind the backs of the American people.
Some excellent points.
Well, that's my feeling, and it just, I'm very, very scared about what's going on in the White House, and I don't think that President Reagan addressed himself tonight, and I think that if President Reagan has a chance, he'll continue to do exactly what he was doing before. And nothing he said tonight changed my opinion.
Thank you very much, caller.
Thank you.
To join in the conversation, the number to call in Hillsborough County is 224-0057. In Pinellas County, 393-0057. And anywhere else in Florida, 1-800-334-0057.
It's the way we start the morning, the way we close the deal. It's the way we share a secret, the way we end the meal. Drinking all kind of coffee, good till the last drop. Hey, only Maxwell House fresh flavor. Tastes like coffee made our way. Only Maxwell House fresh flavor. Tastes like coffee made our way. It's the way we write a letter, the way we set the stage. It's the way we break the winners, take them out of what I raise. Drinking all kind of coffee, good to the last drop. Hey, only Maxwell House fresh flavor. Tastes like coffee made our way. Only Maxwell House fresh flavor. Tastes like coffee made our way. Only Maxwell House fresh flavor. Tastes like coffee made our way.
First on your dial, WPLP. That's the sound of a garage door being opened by hand. A sound you may never have to hear again, because right now, you can get a Sears Special Purchase Craftsman half-horsepower garage door opener with 2 transmitters for only $159.88 while they last. So what's to be? This? Or this? For only $159.88.
There's more for your life at Sears.
Check out all the great values at Sears National Hardware Sale going on now.
The legendary foods of Italy were our heritage, and when Progresso came to America at the turn of the century, we proudly continued the tradition.
We are proud today of Progresso soups, like our magnificent minestrone, crowded with a garden of delicious vegetables. And we're proud that our hearty chicken soup is truly hearty, with large chunks of chicken, vegetables, and enriched pasta. But try all our wonderful soups and taste the pride of Progresso.
It's no lie. Pueblo Village in Indian Rocks Beach is dedicated to the comfort of today's active man from head to toe. For that reason, Pueblo Village carries Camp hosiery. Camp, a truly respected name for comfortable, durable footwear, like Scampies, the ever-popular golf socks, Camp fisherman mitts, debonair and buoyant styles, too. All available in a variety of colors and sizes to fit all. Pueblo Village carries an excellent selection of sportswear for today's active man. Conveniently located on Gulf Boulevard, Indian Rocks Beach.
The time. Bradenton, hi, you're on air at WPLP.
Hello, Bob.
Hi.
Do you feel that the president is senile and subject to Alzheimer's disease and that he should resign?
I have no reason to suspect the president is subject to Alzheimer's disease, as you phrase it. I do believe the president has shown some early signs of senility from time to time. As anybody his age would.
You die hard. I'm not quite old enough to be his father, but I'm considerably older than he is, and I'm maybe suffering from the same thing. I think he did a fine. I think he made a fine speech.
But he didn't address any of the key issues.
He did address the key issues.
No, the key issue, sir, is selling. Sir, the key issue is selling arms to the Ayatollah Khomeini.
With a 1,200-mile border to the Soviet Union, with Turkey in there in the middle, and that's our anchor on that side of the NATO. You guys die so hard, it overwhelms me. Good night, Bob.
Alzheimer's disease, sir. I think it's a word you'll be hearing in the future. One line open, it's in Pinellas, 393-0057 Clearwater. You're on the air at WPLP.
Yes, I heard your caller before last day, and he thinks that Reagan's going to continue his policies, and the way it sounded to me is he said he was. I mean, he said when you read it in the paper, he said, we're going to continue our covert operations, but when you read it in the paper, you'll say, hey, that makes sense.
So they'll be in compliance with American values. He did not say they would be in compliance with American law.
Yeah, that's the way it sounded to me. It's like, we're going to keep doing it, but next time we'll make it sound better. And also, I heard him say that he appointed some kind of special legal advisor or something.
Yes.
So he's going to kind of, try to work around the law. This guy, something like this is the way it sounded to me.
Well, he's not a special legal advisor per se. The gentleman was appointed several months ago to coordinate the release of White House information on this.
Oh, I see.
His name for the moment escapes me.
I haven't heard anything.
Actually, I haven't heard anything about him since the day he was appointed. Until tonight.
Yeah, I heard this caller talking earlier, and it just... I thought, wow, seemed kind of strange to me.
Thank you much.
All right.
9:40 the time. Two lines open now in Pinellas, 393-0057. St. Petersburg, you're on the air.
A few observations on the strength of both the speech and some of the earlier comments concerning what a magnificent orator, campaigner he was. If you recall, every time he made a prepared speech and left the hall or the restaurant or whatever, and was going to get into the limousine to drive away, every time he was leaving the building, getting into the car, them thugs that were his bodyguards refused to have him comment on any kind of question. And the media would like to know, when they were presenting the question more and more, I wonder why he's not allowed to be interviewed. Good case in point, once he got elected, you could see the reason why every time he had a press conference. He's not what you would call not even swift. He's not even lucid a little bit about what kind of question was asked, let alone what kind of answer he gives. That's been his history. It's nothing,
Well, his last press conference in November was, of course, pathetic. It was tragic. He was a man out of touch.
I think somebody gave the order to set him up. We don't want him around here anymore, because anybody that knew him at all that had any affection for him or supposed to have had with that White House gang around him, they'd have never sent him out like that, no matter what a flaming egomaniac he happens to be, including his old lady. Now, this concept of where everybody is demanding an apology, it would have been so much grander, more honorable if he were to publicly apologize. I used to think the value of an apology was quite high, but anymore, to me, an apology is like issuing somebody a license to do it to me again. It hurt so good the first time. Translated in simple language, apologies, you just make yourself feel like you're good, and it's like one pig trying to be satisfied by another pig, and then when the apology is over, the truth of the matter is neither pig is satisfied.
You make a very good point. An apology is worth its weight in gold.
Well, the thing is, overall, whatever he said or how he presented, and I was fascinated, like you, with what he didn't say, with what he didn't, direct his cerebral energies at. And it's all for, like, substance and class and everything else like that.
Well, the thing
it was a dud,
The thing that you've got to really be concerned about is this speech is going to play in Peoria. Make no two ways about it, or make no mistake about it. It's going to play in Peoria. It's going to play with, Joe Citizen out there who sat there with his bowl of pretzels and his can of beer listening to the big guy talk tonight. He's going to come away very impressed. But this speech is going to do utterly nothing to regain the president's prestige and influence within the halls of Congress, within the halls of power in this nation. So...
Robert, you know who I think is going to be indulging him or themselves in the biggest cover-up now is when Baker comes away every evening to go home from that White House, recognizing and becoming totally aware on a day-by-day basis that we have ourselves here somebody that absolutely cannot think, that's the leader of our nation. And the cover-up is going to be about how really screwed up this guy is. That's where the cover-up's going to be, not anymore from Reagan, but from the people around him that are going to try to... like the circus is going to town and the Republicans have the elephant. And who was it that said somebody's a shovel man like Reagan was a shovel man?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Baker's going to be somebody that's going to have a bulldozer, because this guy is way out of it. He does not know how to think, plain, pure, and simple.
Doesn't appear that way. Thank you, caller. 9:43 the time. One line open in Pinellas, 393-0057. I'll tell you, the more I sit here and I think about it, yes, this speech is going to play in Peoria. It's going to do real well out there with the beer-drinking crowd and those of you who drink sherry. Obviously, the president is more concerned with his image than what has gone wrong. Obviously, the president is more concerned with what you think about him than in getting things back under control, because what you think about him isn't going to do the trick. This man has done severe damage with those who have power, with those who have influence, with those who make the laws, with those who are capable of implementing his programs, putting them to action, putting them to work. And they're not going to be impressed with what they heard tonight. As a matter of fact, they may be a little bit more concerned after tonight. Yes, he delivered the speech very well. He looked great. But he didn't say anything. And he avoided the tough issues. There were a few cliches about moving the furniture around, some great words of praise for Howard Baker, a man who deserves words of praise for taking on such an impossible task. But there was no mention of why we kept around a man like Don Reagan for 6 years. There were words of praise for Judge Webster and his appointment to the CIA, but there was no explanation whatsoever for why he had to withdraw. I believe it was Robert Gates, why he had to withdraw that nomination, because he had appointed or nominated a man to head the CIA who was deeply involved in all of this nonsense. And the president should have known at the time of the nomination that he was deeply involved. Outside of the very superficial, I was so concerned with the hostages, I didn't realize what we were doing. There was utterly no explanation for the folly, for the absolute folly of rearming the Ayatollah Khomeini. Very fundamental, very important questions. And there was no promise of an answer for these questions at any time. As a matter of fact, the president all but said, it's over. We're going to go on with other things now. Oh, yeah, we'll try to find the money. But other than that, it's all over. Everybody go home and forget about it, please. Well, it's not going to be forgotten about. and especially as long as he continues to duck the central questions. He didn't help himself tonight. Land O'Lakes, you're on the air at WPLP.
There's a big lesson in all of this, and I think that a lot of people are missing it. The lesson is in the way we elect the president. What we've done is elect the ultimate media candidate. And we've elected a man who, in my opinion, is a very well-meaning, very decent, very kind man who doesn't have a brain. And he's sitting there. He's been used by lots of other people.
Well, you say he's a very fine, decent man. I'm not so sure about that anymore. I think he acts like a very fine, decent man, but let's be honest with ourselves. This is a man who surrounds himself with slime. The likes of Edwin Meese, the likes of Don Reagan, the likes of Michael Deaver. This is slime.
This is a man who, because of his lack of intelligence, has allowed himself to be used all his life by lots of other people on the right wing.
Hey, I'm not a very intelligent man. I don't hang around with slime.
I'm not sure that he can define that. I mean, I think we've really elected a man who is just the ultimate media candidate. And he went on the air tonight and he proved again that his belief is that all he needs to do is control the media. That all he needs to do is put on a good show and control the media, shuffle his feet a couple of times, say shucks a few times, and all the problems of the world will go away. And it just isn't that way.
I'm becoming convinced the more I sit here, and, obviously less than an hour has passed since he started to speak, but the more I sit here, I think the president might have done himself, not in the eyes of the people sitting in Peoria, or Tampa Bay as far as that goes, but I think he may have done himself more damage tonight than good.
Oh, there's no question about that.
He may have bought himself 3 or 4, maybe even 5 points in the polls, so what? That and a quarter will get you a cup of coffee at the White Tower.
I think the Watergate lesson is that when something like this happens, that you just have to throw it all on the table right away, and it's the only way to cleanse it. Because there is absolutely no way you can continue to drag anything out or have any such thing as a partial disclosure. It needs to all be laid out on the table, and when the truth comes out, they're going to find out that the White House is in trouble from top to bottom because it's totally out of control. In the Marine Corps, a lieutenant colonel's principal function is to carry the general's baggage. And we had a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps making our foreign policy. And if that's not scary to the average American, then they're not capable of being scared.
I thank you much.
Thank you.
Pinellas 393-0057. Tampa, you're on the air at WPLP.
Hello.
Hi.
I just like to make a comment on the president's speech. I like to say that I was not the least bit impressed by the president's speech, and I also find it unbelievable that all these newly appointed men that he is surrounding himself with again, that they're so brilliant, they're so honest, they're supposed to be so good. He wants us to believe that all these newly appointees of his are the best. If so, I think it's too late for Ronald Reagan. We will never forget all the lies and the cover-up that he has that has come from the White House these past 4 months.
Well, of course, he leaves himself open for some very legitimate criticism when you pat yourself on the back for your, let's see, his words, sterling reputation of William Webster, or, the great man that Howard Baker is. You leave yourself open for a very embarrassing question. Why didn't you appoint them first?
My gosh, how come he didn't find them men before? Man, you think they come from God knows where, all these newly appointees. And that's why he builds them up so much. These men might be good, but he builds them up so much but he should have found them 6 years ago. I think it's too late for Ronald Reagan. And he has talked himself right out of the White House.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Line open in each county.
The phone numbers that put you on the air at WPLP are in Hillsborough County, 224-0057, in Pinellas County, 393-0057, and anywhere else, toll-free, 1-800-334-0057. Are you the type of person who believes in taking responsibility?
I'm concerned with that speech.
How's that?
I will never vote Republican again. I wouldn't give a damn who's running. With him and all his scumbags that are around him, it was terrible. This episode here, when is he going to face reality? What does he think, we're all stupid? This is a disgrace to have a president get up there and talk the way he did. Taking us...
Well, yes, I'm afraid the president does think that you're stupid. I believe that his entire administration has pointed in that direction. They've
always tried to gloss over things, paint with very broad brushes, frequently even saying things that were just utterly and totally untrue. Yeah, he does think you're stupid.
Well, I'll tell you, I think he was better off he put Nancy out there tonight instead of him.
I'm convinced that the president is not concerned with what went wrong. That speech tonight was intended to buy 3 or 4, maybe even 5 rating points. As though that makes a difference, as though that somehow will vindicate him because people like him.
Bob, when you take the oath of office, it consists of quite a few things, doesn't it? When you're taking that oath?
Well, you swear to uphold the law of the land.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Are we doing it?
It's a gray area, but I believe there's some very strong evidence indicating that some illegalities were committed, including by the president.
Okay. You answered my question. I tell you, it's a sheer disgrace. This is sheer disgrace. We're the laughing stock of the countries and everything else.
Well, I don't know who's more of a disgrace, Ronald Reagan or the American people who put up with this nonsense.
Exactly.
No, I'm no longer blaming Ronald Reagan.
Well, I know they're going along. They're trying to give him a cover under this thing. I mean, I'm a Republican, too, but I'm not proud of what's going on now. And I voted for him, and I'll tell you something. If I can only retract that vote, I'd be so thrilled to do it. Because I'm such ashamed of what the heck is going on here. This is just not feasible.
Well, you can't retract that vote, but I would trust that the next time you cast one, you give a little more consideration to it.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right. Think twice, or maybe a few more times than that. But then again, look what the heck we got in there now. We got a governor that's another one in there that he's no bargain. Why did he keep his paws out of that lottery? What does he got to do? What does he got to get involved in that for?
Especially considering he was dead set against it anyway.
Yeah, but what does he want his paws in there for? He wants to run the show there and put all the people in charge of that? Let him keep his paws out of it. Got no business even touching that money.
Thank you much.
Okay, Bob. Have a nice one.
11 and a half minutes after the hour of 10. 2 lines open, both in Pinellas, 393-0057. Tampa, you're on the air at WPLP.
How you doing there, Bob?
Fine.
Yeah, Bob, I think that the speech and Ronald Reagan's whole policy has been to try and, well, his whole efforts have been toward trying to shift the blame for the whole Iran crisis and a lot of his administration, because he's, I think he's continuously lied about the whole situation. And I think that eventually it's going to, some of the people that had to more or less take the blame for it may come back to haunt him one day, because I think that he's passing the buck. I mean, he's putting the blame on his administration when I think he was behind the entire operation.
Well, I don't know. I don't hear him passing the buck. I just hear him ducking the entire issue.
Well, that too. I mean,
hey, no big thing, but if you think it is, I learned my lesson, and now let's get on with other things.
Yeah, but I think, like I say, I think it's a complete cover-up. I think it's this is more or less to shift the issue from as to whether, I mean, because at one time there was a doubt as to whether he lied or he didn't lie. I think there still is a lot of it, but they're trying to shift the issue from the fact that if he changes his people out, then everything else is going to change. But if he was initially behind it from the beginning, that's all you're doing is changing your people out, but you still got the individual that was initially behind it, or in power at the time.
Well, Ronald Reagan can tell me that he didn't know anything of the diversion, and I will accept that at face value until it's proven otherwise. I'm not sure that he's lying about that. I will accept what he says until proven otherwise. But when he tries to tell me that he can't remember selling arms to the Ayatollah Khomeini, then that's going too far. That's asking too much.
That's true. Right.
That has got to be, it's either a lie or an admission of incompetence, mental incompetence.
Right, correct. I agree with you on that.
And neither is acceptable, and I'm not sure which is worse.
There's no way we could have had the situations come to pass that we've had with Iran and the Middle East, and everybody not know with so much attention on there that he could forget a situation like that. I mean, there's just too much of a focus on that area for him to have forgotten that, unless, like you say, he's got some serious mental problems.
Thank you.
All right.
Take care. Line open in each county. Tampa, you're on the air at WPLP.
Hey, Lassiter, how are you?
Fine.
Well, you're right, the people. At 9 o'clock, I took a walk up the street to take a little walk while he speaks, because I don't listen to him. But you know that more than half the people were watching Bonnie and Clyde. So I looked through the windows and kind of moseyed by. And that's how much they care. We don't even care about them.
Well, you know, you're absolutely right. Here we just had a presidential speech tonight, and I'm sitting here going through the dentistry hour, pulling teeth to get people to respond one way or the other. I don't particularly care which way it is. And that is incredible. I don't think it's any more a case of apathy with the American people. I think it is a case of stupidity with the American people. They are incapable of grasping the issues. It's just too much trouble.
That's right.
And that's beyond apathy. That is stupidity.
They don't care. I don't think they even care about their country, and they talk about their grandchildren and what's going to happen. This guy's buried asleep. He's buried.
Oh, everything we do indicates that we couldn't care less about the future, couldn't care less about our children, or let alone our grandchildren.
You know, I want to ask you something, Bob. You know where that money went? I know where it went. But do you have any idea?
I have no idea at all.
I'll tell you where it went. It went to the Republican candidates running for it. It's going to come out. I'm telling you right now.
Well, there have been a couple of reports unsubstantiated to this point.
That's why Poindexter and North can't talk. They can't say that. That'll really be a bombshell. It will. That'll be a bombshell, and it's going to come out, I hope. I hope that it...
Well, if indeed it's true, I would hope it comes out, too, because the guilty parties must pay for it.
I'm not going to bury that. But anyway, I tried to get you when that man was on, but he should have you for a guest, because you're so super intelligent compared to him. I hate to say this, but you are. You're probably one of the most intelligent guys I've heard on the radio, in the news, and anything, in Washington included, and you're in the wrong town. You really are. It's a shame, because you are a very intelligent guy.
Thank you much.
A lot of smart.
Take care.
Okay.
16 minutes after 10 o'clock, a line open in Hillsborough. St. Pete, you're on the air.
Yeah, hello there, Bob.
Hi.
You know, we don't want to have you leave the Tampa Bay area. I think you're in the right place because you have definitely got a talent that I feel is God-given. You bring the issues out so that, you know, the average guy can sort of hang on to it and kind of deal with it. So, first of all, I thank God for you. Looking at the president's speech, which I did not hear, like the other fellow there, I don't listen to Mr. Reagan speak, but I go back to hear what the other fellows who have been trained, like yourself, the journalists, pick out of it and then come back with the high points. And I think that what we're dealing with here is something that, like you and the last caller were saying, the American people have gone more or less past the point of being apathetic to stupidity.
That's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah. So, you know,
unable to grasp the most obvious flaws, the most obvious problems, just totally unable.
Well, you know, I agree with you, but I say there's a reason for this, Bob. And I'm calling you because, you know, yours is one of the first minds that I would really want to, you know, tangle with this thing with, to get out to the American people. The reason behind all of this, the people are past apathetic. Nobody is really pleading for justice in the way that our laws say that we should. You know, when the European came over to this country X years ago, they brought a little black book with them that has all the answers that this republic would ever have needed in order to go straight. You agree?
Which book did you have in mind?
Well, I'm talking about the little black book called Bible.
No, I wouldn't agree.
Well, let's put it this way. Man is a dual creature. He has a physical nature and a spiritual nature. And when one is off balance to the other, nothing goes straight.
Well, you should have called last night. That's when we were talking about that kind of stuff. Largo, you're on the air. Hello, Largo.
Yes.
You're on the air.
Thank you. Bob?
Yes?
You have a lot of diehards lined up calling you tonight.
I don't have anybody lined up calling me tonight, ma'am.
Haven't you?
No, ma'am.
Well, if you're so brilliant, why don't you run for the president? You call yourself number one. To me, you're last on the totem pole.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody is stupid but you.
Mm-hmm.
You know who's number one to me? Tim Cole.
Uh-huh.
He's number one. But you're diehard, just like the ones that are calling you tonight.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you're enjoying it.
Uh-huh. I hope you're enjoying it, ma'am.
Well, I just wanted to see what you had to say because I expected just what's happening.
Oh.
Yeah, you're just a diehard.
Is that all you have to say?
Yes, that's it. I don't know.
Sick and tired by the way you do. Good time, Papa, gonna poison you. Sprinkle a group of dust all around your bed. Wake up on these days, find your own self dead. She said you shouldn't say that. I said, what did I say to make you mad this time, baby? She said, I don't know. Oh my. She said, I don't know what my head is putting down. A woman I love, she got dimple in her jaw. The clothes she wears made out of the best of cloth. She can take them and wash them, put them up beside the wall. She can throw them out the window, pick them up a little bit before they fall. Sometimes I think you got your habits on. She said you shouldn't say that.
St. Petersburg, you're on the air at WPLP.
I guess I got something entirely different out of that than everybody else did that speech.
Mm-hmm. What's that?
I think he gave his swan song. I think his advisors have told him that, hey, you hang in there and we'll get you out of this position of presidency with honor. And we're just going to not cause any more problems as we go down the road, and that's the way it is.
I would think the only way that Ronald Reagan could get out of his presidency with honor would be to address the problems that he has created.
I don't think he can get out of it with honor. I'm saying I think his advisors have told him that, and that's what he's attempting to do. I think he really has quit. He's given up.
Well, if Ronald Reagan thought that his speech tonight was going to win friends and influence people in the proper places, he's dead wrong.
No,
just absolutely dead wrong.
Win people. I think he was trying to say, hey, I lost. But he doesn't have the proper way of saying it, of course. Of course, you notice that there's no new people in his appointment. It's still the same group of advisors.
Well, with the exception of Howard Baker. Howard Baker is anything but a Ronald Reagan
Howard
fan.
Baker was on the staff. He was his foreign advisor. He was in the Iran-Gate thing as deep as anybody else. He was just smart enough not
Howard Baker?
Yes, sir.
Could have fooled me. I'd never heard that before.
You may fool you, but John Tower has now taken his position of foreign advisor on the NSC staff. Webster's on the NSC staff. There's nobody new.
Howard Baker wasn't on the NSC staff?
Yes, sir, he was. I guarantee you, listen to the speech or read it tomorrow, you'll see that John Tower took Howard Baker's place when Howard Baker went to Ronald Reagan's chief advisor. But Baker...
Well, I shall be reading it with great interest, because if that indeed is true, it's something that got by me.
Well, I'm sorry, it probably did then. Obviously, they had John Tower on tonight. He was on after the president's speech on one of the channels. I don't know which one it was. He even admitted that he had taken Baker's place as advisor on the foreign advisor on the NSC. Webster's on the NSC. So, it's almost like here we got 10 people sitting around a table. Says, okay, Reagan's gone. Which one of you guys want to take his place? We got Casey's gone. Which one of you guys want to take his place for a while? And that's what I guess that's what he's been doing all the time anyway, isn't it? You got to say there's no new faces up there of any type. Mr. Baker's a very smart political man, but honestly, Bob, he was a foreign advisor to President Reagan. No question about it.
It would disappoint me very much if what you're saying is true.
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but it is true.
I thank you much.
Yes, sir.
Be good.
To join in the conversation, the number to call in Hillsborough.
Giving an unbiased opinion of the president's speech or any of the president's programs, but I find it unbelievable, and listening to your various guests that you've had on, it's astonishing to me that these people can come out and make the statements that they're making.
For example?
Says the president is not an intellectual. Well, of course he's not an intellectual. It's not a requirement to be an intellectual to be the president of the United States. You don't have to have 160 IQ.
Don't have to have 160 IQ to be an intellectual, sir. You just have to think about things.
Well, that's for sure. But probably one of the smartest presidents we've had in the past century, certainly with one of the highest IQs, was the greatest disaster we've had, and that's Jimmy Carter. And Carter got us into all kinds of problems.
For example?
The economy in a serious
serious state.
What did Jimmy Carter, sir, what did Jimmy Carter do to put the economy in a serious state?
Well, as I recall, the interest rates were 22%.
What did Jimmy Carter do, sir, to put interest rates at 22%?
Bob,
What did Jimmy Carter do, sir, to put interest rates at 22%? Name one thing. One thing, sir, please.
Are we talking about Reagan or Carter?
No, sir, you brought it up. Sir, you brought it up. Sir, if you would like to continue on this program, you're going to answer the accusation that you've made. I want to know one thing, just one thing, that Jimmy Carter did to bring interest rates to 22%.
He was a total incompetent president.
Oh, that's what he did to bring interest rates to 22%? Sir, you're a total incompetent caller. A totally incompetent caller. You don't call up and make accusations without backing them up. It's no wonder that you're not the least bit concerned that the president is not an intellect. Northwest Hillsboro, you're on the air, WPLP.
Is that me?
Yep, that's you.
Hi, Bob.
Hi.
I think that speech won't cut it. I think the man's dumb and he's a liar, to boot. And I wanted to tell you something that struck me as really strange. On Monday night, I watched CBS News, and Dan Rather said William Casey, who is said to have had brain surgery in December, went home from the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Does that strike you as funny?
No, there's a certain point when someone has a really bad illness, and in this case, obviously a terminal illness,
Yeah.
where they're sent home.
Yeah, but I mean, he said who is said to have had brain surgery. That struck me as really strange. Considering the rest of this convoluted mess.
Are you sure he used that language?
Yes,
Is said to have had brain surgery?
Who is said to have had. Yep. Absolutely.
Well, I would find that curious
really
language, too.
Huh?
I would find that curious language, too.
Got really grabbing, And I would have called you last night, but it was not the subject of discussion. But I haven't heard anybody say anything about him. And that just struck me as really strange.
Thank you.
So that might be something else. Hang in there, Bob.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
A line open in Pinellas, a line open in Hillsboro. Ruskin, you're on the air at WPLP.
Hi, Bob.
Hi.
Bob, I'm a diehard Lassiter supporter, okay? This is one of those preambles that ultimately leads to butt, all right?
Mm-hmm.
So having that in mind, and with the solid foundation that truly I am a solid, there's only one thing I've ever disagreed with you on listening to, and that's the death penalty. Other than that, I can't quarrel with you ever.
Mm-hmm.
However, tonight I'm troubled.
What's that?
I was taught by a very wise person years and years ago, practicing law, that in or out of a courtroom, whenever you've got the opposition right smack in a corner, leave him an escape hatch. Give him an escape hatch once you've made your point. And with Reagan, it seems to me it can be also said, pertinent to what I've just said and was told years ago by this friend, that with all that he is constitutionally and physiologically, psychologically capable of at his age, and with his track record, I'm sure from his perspective he has apologized to us. Put it another way, Bob, if I could get your comment on it, because I'm truly troubled. Fowler has often said on his program, I've heard you back him up on your program later, that most people, when they call in, they operate from a mindset. They don't really approach a given problem with an objective, with an attempt at an objective evaluation of the problem. They come in with all their preconceived notions and prejudices and biases that they've built up. So if it were truly possible for people to say, he did this, he sold arms to the Iranians in order to get the hostages released, it was wrong, would all these people that are calling and so upset about, well, he didn't go far enough, do they want the President of the United States to grovel, whatever is the correct pronunciation of the word? What would it accomplish? Would Bob Lassiter feel better if Reagan had only taken 4 minutes and said, my fellow Americans, I was wrong in my policy. I apologize. It won't happen again. Changes have been made. Changes I'm not happy about. I've had to let a lifetime friend of mine, Don Reagan, go. But I've done all I can to get what appears to be a management-style criticism. I've tried to get that moving again. Good night and God bless you.
Oh, hold on there. Don't go running away.
I'm willing to do. I'm not running away. I'm just.
Oh, I see. Okay, you were finishing up the speech. Yes, okay. You were finishing up the speech. Okay. You bring up some very valid points. You're absolutely right. There is frankly nothing that Ronald Reagan could have done or said tonight to have appeased me, short of resigning. You're absolutely right, and it's for my own good that I should admit that and live up to it. I am bitterly, bitterly disappointed in this administration. I'm bitterly disappointed in some of their programs and some of their actions. There's no two ways about that, and you're right, there's nothing, literally nothing the man could do, even if he had gotten down on the floor and groveled, as you pointed out. It wouldn't have appeased me at all. I guess I'm just so appalled by what I see that I just keep hoping against hope that some type of miracle will take place. And I watched the speech tonight, having no idea what he was going to say, and yet with a degree of optimism, foolish as it may have been, that he would find some kind of words to reassure me that this type of nonsense wasn't going to happen. And there are no such words, which was foolish on my part. You bring up excellent points. And you're right, there's nothing he can do.
Forgive me. Could I add to what I've just said a Lassiter extension? These people calling in, they wanted an apology. That, and with no indication that would have satisfied them. But turn it around, Lassiter has already said, if you're unhappy with Reagan, I don't blame Reagan anymore. I blame you people who voted him in. And maybe those people, with full knowledge, this man was 72 years old. They voted for this man with full knowledge of that, for their own interest. They liked the idea that here's a man that was going to get rid of this welfare mess. Here's a man that was going to make us stand tall, because he told, maybe we owe Reagan an apology. Those people owe him an apology. The expectations have been raised too high, and then when the man turns out to be just another human being, I'm not articulating well now, and it's too bad because I have...
No, you're articulating very well.
Well, I have very strong feelings on this. I do not like Ronald Reagan. I will not recite a litany of the reasons why I don't care for the man, but he is our president. He has gone as far as he can, having in mind, in my humble opinion, just opining. We do have foreign leaders watching this with great interest, because whether people like it or not, short of a resignation or an untimely death, this man is at the helm of our country for the next 2 years. It seems to me maybe we should, as best we can, say, hey, I don't like the man, I don't think he is good for our country, but I don't see how I'm going to help our country by continually, unreasonably bitching about him. There's good enough reasons to bitch about him, but when it goes to a preconceived mindset, and again, I'll say it and cut it, just as Fowler has said on his program, and Bob Lassiter far more times than Fowler, people approach problems, never approach a problem objectively. You just cannot do it.
Well, I agree with you to a point. Where we part company is this philosophy that, well, you know, he is our president, there are people out there watching and all this kind of stuff. We live in a democratic republic, and one of the ways that leaders are influenced in a democratic republic is by listening to their constituency. When their constituency have bitches, as you have phrased it, an excellent word, well, those bitches should be aired. And it may not be
but Bob,
the most constructive...
I'm being rude, but I admire you. So this is a Lassiter point, Bob. You have succeeded. All your talk shows and those around the country and those who I think constitute the loyal opposition, you've made your point. Why do you think in November of last year he lost his Senate? He doesn't have the Senate anymore. He knows that. What can he really do with a pro now? If he's really an incompetent individual, and that may very well be the case, Reagan, then it might be fairly said, well, maybe not logically, but certainly Reagan exploited it to the extent he did not allow people access to him that could temper things. But now there's a Baker in there, a Baker who I don't give much credence to this business about he's given up his presidential aspirations. I think they were nil from the start, not because he's a bad man, but because, well, as Fowler put it, or some other person put it one time, he's too short, maybe, something like that. But the point is that we have the Lassiters have succeeded. That November 84 didn't just happen out of the blue. It was people like you that have been driving it home to people like me. Hey, you know, I got out and went in November of 84 and voted because of you.
Well, we only have the Bakers in there now because the debate continues. And there's still a lot of other people I'd like to see go.
Bob, think just for a minute, if you would, please. Look, do you recall the first time Baker got in front of the mics? My God, the way he grinned and the way the press was treating him and a few of the words that he said, you'd get the impression he's just been elected president. That, hey, don't worry now, I'm here. He didn't say it. Now, I'm not saying that that's what he actually meant to convey, but now put yourself in Reagan's spot in the Oval Office, and he's watching that on TV, and here's a proud man, a very proud man, and it's perfectly obvious with all the hullabaloo about, boy, there's Baker, and this is one. I'm not saying it's right or wrong on his part, but damn it, from a human being standpoint, that's a hell of a thing to have to swallow after 6 years riding high. He didn't knock. He said, hey, I'm glad Baker's here. I admire Reagan to the extent that he didn't take a cop-out and say, North let me down or Reagan let me down. There's still a thing instilled in Reagan called loyalty, which is another fine virtue. What he did is use the affirmative approach. I'm glad I've got Baker. We've got Corelli. We've got Webster. You know, he's indicating, hey, changes already have been made. Now, I think I've said enough. I love your program, and I think I better hang up and listen to it and forget it.
No, I wouldn't forget it. I thank you very much for the call. I would add one thing before you go. Sure. I don't know that I'm going to change my ways because of your call, but you make some excellent points, and I know for a fact you're going to keep me up at least an extra 15, 20 minutes tonight laying there staring at the ceiling, and you might listen tomorrow night.
Oh, God, I'm the one that said that, well, you were capable of it, that you'd never make a 2-hour monologue on earthquakes. I didn't mean to screw up the muscatel. Good night, Bob.
Take care.
The phone numbers that put you on the air at WP.
For contact with the colonel, and I think the colonel and the big man up in Washington have a couple of things in common. They're following the prescribed battle plan of the day. They have been told by someone else how to sell a safe world, how to go out and engage in a battle that neither one of them know anything about, because probably neither one of them have probably drawn any blood out of anyone in a street scrape, much less going over to some big button they know nothing about and bringing a doomsday on. You know, I had an uncle that told me a story once. Told it more than once. He was a man that went into the trenches, never engaged in any battle, and got seasick getting to the French trenches in World War I. Got seasick to the point where he lost about 20 pounds in the 3-week passage. Never saw a German, came back home pretty much a broken man, completely demoralized, never did anything else. But he said, after you've been cold for a good 2 years, and you come back here and everybody carries on business with business as ever. What he was describing, Bob, was a lot like what I would say that we had the day after the colonel, after the big man in Washington decided to, you might say, stick the Russians with all this overkill. He was describing probably a scenario of nuclear plutonium poisoning, and this is something that we don't even grapple with. We don't even pretend to come. You might say on a frontal level with the real issues that we're dealing with. The colonel today, the colonel, I mean, several hours ago, that was giving us this dialogue that you talk about, that you were, I think you were far too gentle with him. You wanted the man maybe to say something that it wasn't part of the battle plan. We wanted Reagan probably to come and give us a better accounting of you might say.
Well, let me jump in here. Insofar as Jack Burke is concerned, I can tell you unequivocally that I don't have the answers. And I can tell you unequivocally that Jack Burke doesn't have the answers. The answers lie somewhere in between. But I thank you much anyway. Clearwater, you're on the air at WPLP.
Yes, good evening, Bob.
Good evening.
I think one of the greatest problems we have in government and or local government, the fact that it should be well established that there are no friends in business. And business and government is a business, likewise running the county and state affairs. And I think this is the greatest problem. And I don't think having Baker there is going to give enough aroma to overcome the aroma that is now in Washington.
Well, the only thing that I'm aware of that Nancy Reagan has had extreme influence in was the departure of Donald Reagan, and if that's the case, she's on my side.
Yes. And, well, that I think has been blown up a little bit out of proportion, and perhaps it has not been. So therefore, I think the fact that, I think it is a fact because he made a point to cover up that incident this evening when he made that statement, or a report of, that he was trying to cover up for Nancy, in other words, that she did not make that statement. She had no influence on him. Well, really, she should.
Okay.
Because he evidently needs someone to influence him just a tiny bit, somewhere along the line, to wake him up occasionally.
Thank you much.
Yes, sir.
Odessa, you're on the air at WPLP.
Yes, Bob. I agree with many of the callers about Reagan and the direction he's taken the country, and I feel that he has betrayed my trust and what this country should stand for. So I'm not going to beat that dead horse anymore. But what really does concern me is the, I guess you'd call it apathy, or really a lack of understanding of the issues and why they don't like him or don't like what he's done. You could see that, for instance, in the reaction to the television series America, for instance. You had opposing sides, both of them missing the point. And I think the reason for it is just a basic lack of a philosophical basis for making a decision about what they believe in and why they believe it. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that. I say that like I've determined that's what the cause is. That's a hypothesis. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that. Why do people not understand the issues? For instance, what I mean by that is, what has Reagan done wrong? I don't rely on anything he may have covered up or other people may have covered up. I would convict him by the words out of his own mouth. When he says he was trying to make diplomatic opening and sending the arms over, well, that's enough to convict him right there.
To ask a question, why? It's very difficult to answer that question without getting involved in a lot of cliches and other such things. The American people have become lazy. I don't know when we started to get lazy, but it was a long, long time ago. And when you fail to use a muscle, that muscle becomes flabby. And the brain is the same way, too. You can make excuses. Within the last hour, I've sat here thinking to myself, within the last hour, and these are literally thoughts that went through my head, within the last hour, that my God, how much can I use that piece of gray flab up and, in between my ears? I've got to sit here and, keep an eye on this jerk in Washington. I got to keep an eye on the guy that I work for. I got to keep an eye on this. I got to keep an eye on that.
Yeah.
There's but so many hours in the day. And I'm getting a little tired. And I'm getting a little burned out. Within the last hour, those thoughts have gone through my head.
Yeah.
So it's relatively easy to make excuses for the American people as to how they got lazy and how they stopped using that muscle that's between their ears and why it's a little flabby now and maybe incapable of being used. It's no problem at all to make excuses. But the fact remains that it's our lives. And it's the lives of our children and the lives of our grandchildren that are at stake. It is our very nation, everything that we stand for.
Exactly.
Ronald Reagan is not a bad man per se. The people around Ronald Reagan are not bad men per se. They are not evil men. They are men who, in my humble estimation, have ideas that are not good for the nation. That could be described as a difference of opinion. But nonetheless, I feel very strongly that their ideas are poor or bad for the nation. And yet, if I and if the other 250 million people that I share this nation with throw up our hands and walk away and say, oh, well, it's just too much, then bad people are going to come in. Power corrupts. People who have power tend to get corrupt. People who have power unchecked tend to become corrupt. And it is a lot of work paying attention to what is going on in the world, and it is a lot of effort taking part in a debate. How did it happen? Why did it happen? I don't know. When is it going to change? Well, that's an easy one. I can answer that. And that's what's so damn frustrating. It isn't going to change until it gets a hell of a lot worse.
I'm afraid you're right.
And that is so damned frustrating.
I share that with you. And I think we have come to be a great country and are a great country only because of the momentum of some great men who lived a long time ago. And I hate to see that momentum run down.
We're living off of our capital, and we're living off our past laurels. There ain't nothing that's going to change. You want to talk about stupidity? You want to know what's stupid? Sitting here spitting in the wind. That's what's stupid, because it's not going to change. There's nothing I or anybody else can do about it.
I find it hard to resign myself to that, though.
Well, it happens to be the truth, but nonetheless, at least while I'm in my idealistic stage, which hopefully will last another 40 or 50 years, I feel compelled to speak out. I feel compelled to say, hey, let me grab you by the shoulders and shake you. You could change it, I guess, if you wanted to. At least I'd like to think in my heart that you could. And yet I know in my head that you can't. We're not going to change. We're not going to mend our ways until something awful happens. Then and only then will we all wake up at the same time.
I think you're probably right. I don't think that something is a nuclear war. I just don't think that's where it ends. But I see a possibility of a fate worse than that. Just a gradual destruction of what this country means. And that to me is worse than a catastrophic end.
I agree.
Well,
I agree.
Let's hope there is something we can do. This is the first time I ever called your station or any other station, for that matter.
Well, in that case, I must apologize to you because you picked the worst possible time to do it, right at the end of the show. I've got to run. Please call again.
Pleasure talking with you.
Take care.
Good night.
On that cheery call, we will end the program tonight. Tomorrow night, 4 hours. Wide open. Behave yourselves.